Victoria Hale's hands trembled against the cold metal of her Mercedes as rain hammered the asphalt around her designer heels. The pain in her abdomen had gone from sharp to unbearable, from manageable to terrifying. She'd built an empire by never showing weakness, never asking for help, never surrendering control. But now, collapsed behind the city's most exclusive restaurant, she couldn't even stand. When the grease-stained mechanic rushed toward her through the downpour, she gasped the words that would change everything. "I can't go to the hospital." Ethan Cole froze mid-step, his blood turning to ice. Those were the exact words his wife had whispered 3 years ago, the last night he ever saw her alive. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please hit the like button and comment what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The rain had started as a whisper against the windows of Marcello's, the kind of upscale Italian restaurant where reservation lists stretched months into the future and the cheapest bottle of wine cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths, and hushed conversations conducted in the reverent tones reserved for places where dinner came with a side of status affirmation. Victoria Hale barely noticed the ambiance anymore. She'd been to Marcello's 47 times in the past 2 years, always for business, always in the private dining room where deals were brokered over braised short ribs and carefully cultivated relationships. Tonight had been no different. 3 hours of strategic conversation with potential investors, every word calculated, every smile precisely measured. Her company, Hale Innovations, stood on the precipice of its largest expansion yet, and Victoria had learned long ago that fortunes were won and lost over meals like these. She'd felt the first twinge of discomfort during the second course, a subtle cramping low in her abdomen that she'd dismissed as stress, or perhaps the overly rich truffle risotto. By dessert, the discomfort had sharpened into something more insistent, but Victoria had maintained her composure, her poker face honed by a decade of high-stakes negotiations. She'd closed the deal, shaken hands with practiced firmness, and made her excuses about an early morning flight to Tokyo. The valet had brought her Mercedes SL around to the covered entrance, but Victoria had waved him off with a generous tip. She preferred to drive herself, one of the few moments in her carefully orchestrated life where she maintained complete control. The young man had hurried back inside, grateful to escape the worsening weather. That's when the pain had truly announced itself. Victoria had made it perhaps 20 feet from the restaurant's entrance, into the dimly lit section of the parking lot reserved for the most exclusive patrons, when the cramping transformed into something savage and unrelenting. Her breath caught. Her vision swam. She'd grabbed for the door handle of her car, fumbling with keys that suddenly felt slippery in her rain-dampened hands. The world tilted. She remembered her knees hitting the wet pavement, the shock of cold water soaking through her custom-tailored pants. Her phone had clattered from her purse, skittering across the asphalt. The pain in her abdomen was no longer just pain. It was a white-hot vice that squeezed tighter with every breath, radiating outward until she couldn't tell where it began or ended. "Help!" she'd tried to call out, but the word came as barely a whisper, swallowed by the drumming rain and the distance between her and the restaurant's glowing windows. That's when she'd heard the footsteps. Ethan Cole's Tuesday nights followed a pattern worn smooth by repetition. Pick up his daughter Maya from after-school care at 6. Stop by Chen's grocery for whatever was on sale. Make dinner, usually something involving pasta because 8-year-olds lived on carbohydrates and optimism. Help with homework. Bath time. 2 stories, never just one, because Maya had inherited her mother's negotiation skills. Lights out by 9. Then, and only then, did Ethan allow himself to return to the small garage he'd been nursing back to life for the past 18 months. Cole's Auto Repair occupied a squat building on the industrial edge of town, sandwiched between a warehouse that sold plumbing supplies and a laundromat that had seen better decades. The sign out front still flickered erratically, and the paint on the garage doors was peeling, but the bay inside was clean and the tools were good. Ethan made sure of that. Tonight he'd been working on Mrs. Patterson's ancient Volvo, the 3rd time this month she'd brought it in. The car was held together by prayer and zip ties at this point, but Mrs. Patterson was 76 and living on a fixed income. and Ethan charged her exactly what she could afford, which was to say, almost nothing. He made up the difference on the luxury vehicles that occasionally found their way to his garage, the ones whose owners appreciated quality work more than a prestigious address. He'd been elbow deep in the Volvo's transmission when his phone had buzzed with a text from Maya's babysitter, Mrs. Chen, from upstairs. The message included a photo of his daughter already asleep, curled around her favorite stuffed elephant, and a simple note, "All good here." Finished her math homework. She ate 3 helpings of dinner. Ethan had smiled at that. Maya's appetite had finally returned to normal after years of being a ghost of itself. Small victories. He'd wrapped up for the night around 11, later than intended but satisfied with the progress. The rain had started while he'd been working, a spring storm that had rolled in with surprising intensity. Ethan had locked up the garage, pulled his worn jacket tighter, and jogged toward his truck, a 15-year-old Ford F-150 that he maintained with the kind of care most people reserved for newborns. The route home took him past Marcello's. Ethan had driven this street 1,000 times, barely registering the restaurant's existence beyond a vague awareness that it represented a world entirely separate from his own. He'd certainly never eaten there. The closest he'd come was changing a flat tire for one of their valets 2 years back, a kid who'd been pathetically grateful and had offered Ethan a 20 that he'd refused. Tonight, something made him slow down. Maybe it was the flash of red taillights reflecting off the wet pavement. Maybe it was the shape that seemed wrong, too low to the ground, near the back of the parking lot. Maybe it was instinct, the same visceral awareness that had kept him alive during 3 tours overseas, that had taught him to notice when things didn't fit the pattern. He pulled into the parking lot, windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm. That's when he saw her. A woman, collapsed beside a gleaming Mercedes, rain plastering dark hair to her face. Even from a distance, even in the distorted light, Ethan could see she was in trouble. Her body was curled into itself, one hand pressed against her stomach, the other reaching towards something, her phone, he realized, lying just beyond her fingertips in a puddle. Ethan was out of his truck before conscious thought caught up with action, his boots splashing through standing water. Years of emergency medical training kicked in, the muscle memory of combat scenarios and field hospitals overriding everything else. "Ma'am?" He dropped to a crouch beside her, his hands already moving to assess, checking for visible injuries, watching the rise and fall of her chest, noting the way she held herself. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. They were dark, sharp even through obvious pain, and they focused on him with an intensity that was almost startling. "I'm fine," she managed, and despite everything, despite the rain and the pain and the fact that she was clearly anything but fine, her voice carried the crisp authority of someone used to being obeyed. "With respect, ma'am, you're not fine." Ethan kept his voice steady, calm, the same tone he'd used with wounded soldiers who were running on adrenaline and denial. "I'm going to help you. My name's Ethan. Can you tell me your name?" "Victoria." The word came through gritted teeth. "Victoria Hale." "Okay, Victoria. Can you tell me where it hurts?" She moved the hand that had been pressed against her abdomen, and even in the poor light, Ethan could see her palm was shaking. "Here. Started about an hour ago, getting worse." Ethan's training cataloged the symptoms automatically. Acute abdominal pain, rigid posture suggesting peritoneal irritation, cold sweat despite the relatively warm rain, rapid, shallow breathing. The possibilities ran through his mind like a checklist: appendicitis, ruptured cyst, internal bleeding. "We need to get you to a hospital," he said, already reaching for his phone. "I'm going to call an ambulance." "No!" The word came sharp and immediate, cutting through the rain with absolute finality. Ethan paused, his thumb hovering over the emergency call button. "Victoria, you need medical attention. This could be serious." "I said no." Her hand shot out and gripped his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes locked onto his, and Ethan saw something there that he recognized too well. Not just pain, but fear. Raw, bone-deep terror. "I can't go to the hospital. I can't!" The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. "I can't go to the hospital." His wife's voice echoed across 3 years, across all the distance that death creates. Sarah, sitting on their bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, her face pale and drawn, insisting she was fine, that it was just a migraine, that hospitals were for people who were actually sick. Sarah, who'd grown up in foster care, who'd spent enough time in emergency rooms as a child to associate them with social workers and questions and the threat of being taken away. Sarah, who'd made him promise that night to let her sleep it off, who'd convinced him with those same eyes full of fear and determination that she'd be okay by morning. By morning, she'd been gone. An aneurysm, the coroner had said. Nothing anyone could have done, they'd told him. But Ethan knew better. If he'd called 911 that night, if he'd refused to listen to her fear, if he'd been stronger. "Sir?" Victoria's voice pulled him back. "Are you all right?" Ethan realized his hands were shaking. He forced himself to breathe, to push down the memories that threatened to drown him. "Yeah, sorry." He studied her face, seeing past the expensive makeup and the designer clothes to the person underneath. "But I can't let you make the same mistake." "You don't understand? Then help me understand." He shifted to sit beside her, taking some weight off his knees. The rain continued to pour, but neither of them seemed to notice anymore. "Talk to me, Victoria. Why can't you go to the hospital?" She was quiet for a long moment, her breathing shallow and pained. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its sharp edges. "When I was 7, my mother got sick. Pneumonia," they said later, but at the time we didn't know. She kept saying she was fine, that she just needed rest. My father was away on business. He was always away on business. By the time the neighbor called the ambulance, it was bad. Ethan waited, giving her space. They took her to County General. I remember the ambulance, the sirens, how scared she looked. My father flew back, but he didn't make it in time. She died in the emergency room while I sat in the waiting area with a social worker who kept giving me juice boxes and telling me everything would be okay. Victoria's laugh was bitter, broken. Everything wasn't okay. Nothing was ever okay again. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. The hospital became this place where everything ended, where people went in and didn't come out. I know it's irrational. I know hospitals save people. I've donated millions to medical research, for crying out loud. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it, she broke off, her hand pressing harder against her abdomen. I built an empire by trusting my instincts, by listening to my gut, and every instinct I have is screaming that if I go through those doors, I won't come back out. The rain seemed to intensify, drumming on the pavement around them in a relentless rhythm. Ethan understood trauma, understood how it could burrow deep and reshape everything, how fear could become so fundamental that you didn't even recognize it as fear anymore, just as truth. "My wife died 3 years ago," he heard himself say. The words came out rough, unpracticed. He didn't talk about Sarah, not to anyone except maybe Mrs. Chen after too many sleepless nights. "She had a headache, bad one. Told me she didn't want to go to the hospital, that she'd had them before, that she'd be fine. I believed her because it was easier than fighting, easier than facing her fear. By morning, she was gone. Brain aneurysm." Victoria's eyes widened slightly. "I'm so sorry." "I was a combat medic," Ethan continued. 3 tours. Saved lives in conditions that would make a hospital look like paradise. But when it mattered most, when it was my wife, I froze. I let her fear become my fear, and she died because I was too weak to push past it. That wasn't weakness. Yes, it was. The admission came sharp, final. And I've had 3 years to live with it. 3 years of my daughter asking why mommy isn't here. 3 years of knowing that if I'd been stronger, Sarah might be. So I'm telling you right now, Victoria, I won't make that mistake again." She stared at him, this stranger in grease-stained clothes who'd appeared out of the rain like some sort of guardian angel, or possibly a ghost. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your fear is real and valid, and I understand it, but it's also going to kill you if you let it." Ethan held her gaze. "I can see the signs, Victoria. Rigid abdomen, cold sweats, the way you're guarding your right side. This isn't something that's going to get better on its own. This is serious. And every minute we sit here in the rain debating it, you're getting worse. You can't know that. I do know that. I've seen enough battlefield injuries to recognize peritonitis when I see it. My guess? Appendicitis, probably acute, maybe already ruptured. You need surgery. And you need it soon. Victoria's breath came faster, panic rising visibly in her chest. I can't do it. You don't understand what it's like. You're right. I don't understand exactly what it's like to be you. But I understand fear. I understand trauma. And I understand that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is face the thing that terrifies us most. He paused, then added more softly, I also understand that sometimes we need help to do that. I don't need help. The words were automatic, defensive, but they lacked conviction. Everyone needs help sometimes, Victoria, even people who've spent their whole lives proving they don't. She closed her eyes, and Ethan saw a tear slide down her cheek, mixing with the rain. I've built everything by myself, made myself successful, made myself strong, made myself someone who doesn't need anyone. If I fall apart now, needing medical care isn't falling apart. It's being human. Ethan shifted slightly, wincing as his knee protested. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to call an ambulance whether you agree or not, because I'm not going to sit here and watch you die from stubbornness and trauma. But I'd rather you make this choice yourself. I'd rather you be the one who decides you're worth saving. Easy for you to say. Nothing about this is easy. His voice roughened. Do you think it's easy for me to push someone toward a hospital when my wife's death taught me that hospitals are where people go to die? Do you think I don't feel that same terror every time I see those emergency room doors? But I learned something else that night, Victoria. I learned that fear is a liar. It doesn't keep us safe, it just keeps us from living. Victoria opened her eyes again, studying his face with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in years. You really were a medic? Army, 68 Bulayu, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Saw things I wouldn't wish on anyone. Did things I'm proud of and things that still wake me up at night. But the training was real, and the experience was real. And right now I'm telling you, as someone who knows what they're talking about, you're in serious danger. And if I say no, if I refuse to go, Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then I'll sit here with you until you pass out from the pain, at which point I'll call the ambulance anyway, and you'll wake up in the very hospital you're trying to avoid. Except you'll be in worse shape, and I'll have wasted precious time that could make the difference between a routine surgery and something much more serious. Is that really what you want? I want to not be terrified. The confession came small, almost childlike. I want to be brave like everyone thinks I am. Victoria, look at me. Ethan waited until her eyes met his. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the thing anyway. It means acknowledging the fear and choosing to move forward despite it. And right now, being brave means letting me help you. The rain continued its assault, but something had shifted between them, some understanding that transcended the circumstances. 2 people, both haunted by loss, both shaped by trauma, finding connection in the most unlikely of moments. If I do this, Victoria said slowly, if I let you take me to the hospital, will you stay? Every second, Ethan promised without hesitation. I won't leave you alone, not for a moment. Even though I'm a complete stranger? Even though, he managed a slight smile. Besides, my daughter's already asleep and my babysitter's probably watching her Korean dramas by now. I've got time. Despite everything, Victoria almost laughed. It came out as more of a pained exhale, but the attempt was there. You have a daughter? Maya. She's 8, smartest kid you'll ever meet, though I might be biased. Looks just like her mother, which kills me and saves me in equal measure every single day. And you're raising her alone? Yeah, some days better than others, but we manage. She's the reason I get up in the morning, the reason I keep the garage running, the reason I'm still here at all. Ethan's voice softened. She's also the reason I can't let you die in this parking lot. Because I know what it's like to lose a parent, and I know what it does to a kid, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone's child. I don't have children, Victoria said quietly. Never had time. Built a company instead, like that was some sort of equivalent. It's not too late. For children? For any of it. For changing course, for choosing differently, for deciding that maybe success isn't just about what you build, but who you become in the building of it. Ethan shifted his weight, his clothes now completely soaked through. But none of that matters if you don't survive tonight. Victoria was quiet, and Ethan could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Fear versus logic, trauma versus survival instinct. He understood that battle intimately. He fought it himself every single day. Finally, she spoke. If we do this, and I'm not saying we are, but if we don't call an ambulance, Victoria, let me finish. Ambulances mean EMTs, mean reports, mean questions. I know people at County General, people who'd recognize my name, people who'd call board members, people who'd turn this into something public and complicated, and she broke off, breathing hard. If we're doing this, we do it quietly. You drive me. We go straight to the emergency entrance, in and out before anyone realizes what's happening. It was a terrible idea, medically speaking. Ethan knew that. But he also knew that getting her to agree to go at all was the priority, and if this was what it took... My truck's right over there, he said, gesturing toward the battered F-150. But Victoria, we need to go now. Not in 5 minutes, not after you think about it more. Now. She nodded, the movement small but definite. Okay, help me up. Ethan stood first, his muscles protesting the sustained crouch, then extended both hands down to her. Victoria gripped them. Her hands were ice cold despite the warm rain, and he pulled her carefully to her feet. She swayed immediately, a soft gasp of pain escaping her lips, and Ethan wrapped an arm around her waist to steady her. Easy, I've got you. My phone, I'll grab it. He helped her lean against the Mercedes, then scooped up her phone from the puddle. The screen was cracked but still glowing. He handed it to her, then retrieved her purse from where it had fallen beside the car. Anything else? Keys, in my hand when I fell. Ethan spotted them near the rear tire, collected them, and locked her car with the remote. All set. Now let's get you out of this rain. The walk to his truck was only about 30 feet, but it might as well have been 30 miles. Victoria moved like every step cost her, one arm wrapped around her middle, the other gripping Ethan's shoulder for support. He matched her pace, patient and steady, murmuring encouragement. Almost there. You're doing great. Just a few more steps. When they reached the F-150, Ethan helped her into the passenger seat with the kind of care usually reserved for the critically injured, which, he supposed, she was. He reached across to buckle her seatbelt, trying not to jostle her too much. Comfortable as you can be? He asked. That's a relative term right now. But there was something almost like humor in her voice, which Ethan took as a good sign. He closed her door and jogged around to the driver's side, climbing in and starting the engine in one smooth motion. The old Ford rumbled to life with its characteristic diesel rattle. Ethan cranked the heat up. Victoria was shivering now, whether from cold or shock he couldn't tell, and pulled out of the parking lot with deliberate care. County General was 12 minutes away in good traffic. Tonight, with the rain and the late hour, he could make it in 8, maybe 7 if he pushed it. But pushing it meant sharp turns and sudden stops, and sharp turns, and sudden stops meant more pain for Victoria. He'd have to balance speed with care, urgency with caution. The windshield wipers beat their steady rhythm as Ethan navigated onto the main road. Beside him, Victoria had her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and controlled. He'd seen that look before. The intense concentration required to manage pain, to keep it compartmentalized so it didn't overwhelm everything else. Talk to me, he said, keeping his voice calm. Tell me about your company. What does Hale Innovations do? Victoria opened one eye. You're trying to distract me. Is it working? Not particularly. But she took a breath and continued anyway. Tech consulting. We help legacy companies modernize their infrastructure, train their teams, integrate new systems. Started it 10 years ago with $15,000 and a laptop. Now we have offices in 6 countries and gross revenue that would make your eyes water. That's impressive. It's exhausting. She shifted slightly, wincing. But it's mine. Everything I have, I built it myself. No partners, no investors, at least not until recently. No one to answer to except myself. Lonely way to live. Safe way to live, she corrected. Can't lose what you never have. Ethan understood that logic too well. He'd been living it for 3 years, ever since Sarah died. Keep people at a distance. Don't let anyone too close. Protect yourself by controlling exactly how much you let the world in. It worked until it didn't, until the isolation became its own kind of death. What about you? Victoria asked, her voice strained. How does a combat medic end up running an auto repair shop? Long story. We've got time. Unless I'm dying, in which case you should probably drive faster. You're not dying, but I am going to drive a little faster. Ethan accelerated smoothly through a yellow light. The short version is I came home from my last tour and realized I couldn't do medical work anymore. Too many memories, too much trauma. PTSD is real, and it's not picky about who it takes. But I'd always been good with engines. Learned from my grandfather, who ran a shop back in Pennsylvania. So when Sarah got pregnant with Maya, I started thinking about stability, about building something that would last. Found a job at a garage here in town, worked there for 7 years, saved everything I could. When the owner retired, he sold me the business for a fraction of what it was worth, called it my thank you for your service discount. That's kind of him. It was. Though the business was barely hanging on at that point, so maybe he was just happy to unload it on someone else. Ethan smiled slightly. Either way, I've been trying to turn it around for the past 18 months. Some days it feels possible. Others you wonder what the hell you were thinking. Exactly that. They drove in silence for a few moments, the rain easing slightly. Ethan kept checking on Victoria from the corner of his eye, monitoring her color, her breathing, the way she held herself. She was deteriorating, not dramatically, but visibly. Every minute counted now. I'm scared, Victoria said suddenly, her voice small in the darkness of the truck cab. I know I agreed to this. I know it's the right thing, but I'm absolutely terrified. I know. What if... She broke off, then forced herself to continue. What if I go in there and I don't come back out? What if my mother's story becomes my story? It won't. You can't promise that. You're right, I can't promise that. Medicine isn't magic, and sometimes people die even when doctors do everything right. But I can promise you that your chances are a hell of a lot better in that hospital than they are anywhere else. I can promise you that modern medicine is a miracle compared to what your mother had access to 20-something years ago. And I can promise you that I will be right there beside you every single step of the way. Victoria turned to look at him fully, and even in the dim light from the dashboard, Ethan could see tears streaming down her face. Why? Why do you even care? You don't know me. I'm just some woman who collapsed in a parking lot. You're a person in pain who needs help. That's all the reason I need. Ethan paused, then added more quietly, and maybe because I failed someone once, someone I loved, and I won't fail again. Not if I can help it. Not while I still have breath in my body and the ability to act. Your wife would want me to save you. Sarah had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. If she were here, she'd already have called the ambulance and probably be riding with you to the hospital herself, holding your hand the whole way. His voice caught slightly. She always said the world didn't need more people who looked the other way. It needed people who saw pain and moved toward it instead of away from it. She sounds like she was an incredible person. She was, and she'd be kicking my ass right now if I let you die because I was too afraid to push past your fear. The hospital appeared ahead of them, a sprawling complex of buildings lit up against the dark sky. The emergency room entrance glowed with harsh fluorescent light, ambulances parked in designated bays. Ethan felt Victoria tense beside him, her entire body going rigid. I can't, she whispered. Ethan, I can't. I thought I could, but I can't. He pulled into the drop-off area but didn't turn off the engine, didn't immediately open the door. Instead, he shifted to face her, taking both of her hands in his. They were shaking. Look at me, Victoria. She did, her eyes wide with panic. Right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can let the 7-year-old girl who lost her mother make this decision, or you can let the woman who built a multinational company make it. You can let trauma win, or you can choose to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time the story ends differently. I don't know if I'm that strong. Yes, you do. You didn't build an empire by being weak. You didn't survive losing your mother by being fragile. You have survived every single difficult day of your life so far, and that alone makes you stronger than you think. He squeezed her hands gently, and you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. When we walk through those doors, I'm right beside you. When they take you to triage, I'm in the waiting room. When you go into surgery, I'll be the first face you see when you wake up. You're not alone in this. You promise? I promise. Victoria took a shuddering breath, then another. Ethan could see the exact moment she made the decision, could see something shift behind her eyes. From fear to determination, from paralysis to action. Okay, she said. Okay, let's do this before I lose my nerve. Ethan killed the engine and was around to her side of the truck in seconds, helping her down carefully. The emergency room entrance was only 20 feet away, but those 20 feet felt infinite. Victoria leaned heavily on him, her breath coming in short gasps, but she kept moving. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical whisper. Inside, the ER was controlled chaos, the usual Tuesday night mix of crying children, anxious relatives, and patients in various states of distress. A triage nurse looked up from her station, took one look at Victoria's pallor and the way she was clutching her abdomen, and immediately stood. I need a wheelchair here, she called, then moved toward them quickly. What's going on? Severe abdominal pain, Ethan said, slipping automatically into medical mode. Started approximately 2 hours ago, progressively worsening. Right lower quadrant, rigid abdomen on palpation, patient is cold and clammy. Suspect acute appendicitis, possibly ruptured. The nurse's eyes sharpened. You medical? Former combat medic. Good enough. Let's get her back. The wheelchair arrived, pushed by an orderly, and the nurse helped Victoria into it. Honey, we're going to take good care of you, all right? What's your name? Victoria Hale, Victoria managed, then looked back at Ethan with panic in her eyes. I'm right here, he said immediately, following as they wheeled her toward the triage area. Not going anywhere. The nurse glanced at him. Family? Ethan hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Yes. It was a lie, but a necessary one. He'd worry about the ethics later. Right now, Victoria needed him, and he'd promised not to leave her alone. They moved through the organized chaos of the emergency room, past curtained examination areas and the steady beep of monitors. A young doctor intercepted them, listening as the nurse rattled off Victoria's symptoms and Ethan's preliminary assessment. He asked Victoria a rapid series of questions, his hands gently probing her abdomen while she tried not to flinch. We're going to get you to imaging, the doctor said, his voice calm and professional. I want to run a CT scan, confirm what we're dealing with. If it's appendicitis, we'll have surgery standing by. How long? Victoria asked, her voice tight. Fast as we can. I promise. He looked at Ethan. You can wait in the family area. I'm staying with her, Ethan said firmly. Sir, hospital policy. I don't care about policy. I promised I'd stay and I'm staying. The doctor looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Ethan's expression made him reconsider. Fine. But you'll need to wait outside imaging, radiation safety. That's fine, as long as she knows I'm there. They wheeled Victoria down another corridor, moving with the kind of controlled urgency that spoke to the seriousness of her condition. Ethan kept pace beside the wheelchair, his hand finding Victoria's where it gripped the armrest. She held on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Outside the imaging suite, they had to stop. The technician was apologetic but firm, no one beyond this point except the patient. Ethan crouched beside Victoria's wheelchair, making sure she could see his face clearly. This is where I have to wait, he said, but I'll be right here when you come out, 10 feet away, maximum. You understand? Victoria nodded, but her grip on his hand tightened. What if? No what ifs. Just focus on getting through the scan. They're going to slide you into a machine that looks like a giant donut. It's going to make some weird noises, and then they're going to have answers. That's it. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. Fair point. He managed a smile. But you've got this. You've faced down investors and competitors and built something incredible from nothing. A CT scan is nothing compared to that. She laughed, the sound wavering but real. You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate the effort. I'll be right here, he repeated. The second you're done, I'm back. Okay? Okay. They wheeled her through the doors, and Ethan watched until she disappeared around a corner. Then he leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was, how completely soaked his clothes remained, how much adrenaline had been keeping him upright. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. Everything's still good. Maya hasn't stirred. Take your time. Ethan typed back a quick thank you, then slid down the wall to sit on the floor. The hospital corridor was quiet here, away from the main ER. He could hear the distant sounds of medical equipment, muffled conversations, the occasional overhead page. All of it achingly familiar from those terrible hours 3 years ago when he'd sat in a different corridor in a different hospital, waiting for news that never came. But this was different. This time he'd acted. This time he hadn't let fear paralyze him. This time... Sir? Ethan looked up to find a nurse standing over him. Yes? The patient's asking for you. She's getting agitated, and we need her to stay still for the scan. Would you mind coming in? You can stand behind the lead shield, talk to her through the intercom. He was on his feet instantly. Of course. The nurse led him into the control room, where the technician sat at a bank of monitors. Through the window, Ethan could see Victoria on the scanning table, her face pale against the white sheet, her eyes squeezed shut. The technician handed him a microphone. Just talk to her. Help her stay calm. We'll do the rest. Ethan pressed the button. Hey, Victoria. It's Ethan. Her eyes flew open, searching for him even though she couldn't see through the one-way glass. I'm right here, just like I promised. I can see you, and you're doing great. I don't feel great. Her voice came through the speaker, thin and scared. I feel like I'm about to fall apart. Then fall apart. I'll help you put the pieces back together after. But right now you just need to hold still for a few more minutes. Can you do that? I think so. I know so. You're the strongest person I've met, Victoria Hale. This machine's got nothing on you. The technician started the scan, and the massive donut-shaped machine hummed to life. Ethan kept talking, kept his voice steady and calm, telling Victoria about Maya's latest school project, about the ancient Volvo he'd been working on, about anything and everything that might distract her from the fear and the pain and the terrible vulnerability of being a patient. The scan took 12 minutes. 12 minutes that felt like hours, but also passed in a blur of Ethan's voice and the machine's mechanical rhythm. When it was done, they brought Victoria back out, and Ethan was there waiting, his hand finding hers immediately. You did it, he said. All done. Now what? Now we wait for the results. And then he paused as the young doctor from earlier approached, a tablet in his hands and a serious expression on his face. Ms. Hale, the doctor said, I need to speak with you about your scan results. Victoria's grip on Ethan's hand became almost painful. Just tell me. Hell? The doctor glanced at Ethan, then back to Victoria. It's your appendix. Acutely inflamed, on the verge of rupture if it hasn't already. You need surgery immediately. We've already called the surgical team. They're prepping an OR now. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Victoria's face had gone even paler, if that was possible. You mean I was right? Ethan said quietly to her. It was appendicitis. You were right. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. You saved my life. Not yet, but they will. He looked at the doctor. How long until surgery? 20 minutes, maybe less. We're moving fast because of the risk of rupture. The doctor turned back to Victoria. I know this is scary, Ms. Hale, but appendectomies are one of the most common surgeries we perform. The surgical team is excellent, and your prognosis is very good, assuming we get you into surgery soon. Victoria nodded mechanically, but Ethan could see she was shutting down, the fear overwhelming everything else. He crouched beside her wheelchair again, forcing her to look at him. Hey, stay with me. Don't go into your head right now. They're going to cut me open. They're going to save your life. There's a difference. I can't do this. I changed my mind. I want to leave. Victoria, I want to leave. Her voice rose, panic clear and sharp. I don't want surgery. I don't want to be here. I want to go home. What you want and what you need are two different things right now. Ethan kept his voice firm but gentle. And what you need is this surgery. What you need is to trust that these people know what they're doing. What you need is to be brave for just a little bit longer. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Being terrified and being brave aren't mutually exclusive. You think I wasn't terrified every single time I ran toward gunfire to save a wounded soldier? You think I don't wake up terrified every morning that I'm failing Maya? Fear doesn't make you weak, Victoria. It makes you human. What matters is what you do despite the fear. A nurse appeared with paperwork, apologetic for the interruption, but insistent on the necessity of signatures and consents. Victoria's hand shook as she signed, each line of her usually elegant script wavering and uncertain. They began moving again, heading toward the surgical wing. Ethan walked beside the wheelchair, his presence the only constant in Victoria's rapidly narrowing world. At the doors to the pre-op area, they had to stop again. "This is as far as you can go," the nurse said to Ethan apologetically. "I'm sorry." Victoria's panic was immediate and visceral. No, he promised he'd stay." "I'll be right here," Ethan interrupted, his voice cutting through her fear. "Right outside these doors. The second you're out of surgery, I'll be in recovery. You won't wake up alone." "You promise?" "I promise." "Have I broken a promise to you yet?" "No." "Then trust me." He leaned down, his voice dropping to something only she could hear. "You are going to get through this, Victoria. You're going to wake up on the other side without your appendix and with a future you almost didn't have. And when you do, we're going to figure out what comes next. But right now, you need to let these people do their jobs. Can you do that?" She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. But you stay." "Wild horses couldn't drag me away." They wheeled her through the double doors, and Ethan watched until she disappeared from view. Then he turned and found the nearest chair, sinking into it with a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the physical and everything to do with the emotional weight of the night. His phone read 12:47 a.m. Less than 2 hours had passed since he'd spotted Victoria collapsed in that parking lot. 2 hours that had fundamentally changed the trajectory of both their lives in ways neither of them could fully comprehend yet. Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, saving someone else's life would help heal the gaping wound left by failing to save Sarah's. The surgical waiting room slowly filled with the detritus of a long night, empty coffee cups, worried families, the quiet desperation of people waiting for news about their loved ones. Ethan sat in the same plastic chair, unwilling to move far from the doors Victoria had disappeared through, his presence a promise kept even though she couldn't see it. He thought about Maya sleeping peacefully upstairs from Mrs. Chen's apartment, dreaming whatever dreams 8-year-olds dreamed. He thought about Sarah and the last night he'd seen her alive. He thought about Victoria and the fear in her eyes, and the courage it had taken to walk through those hospital doors despite every instinct screaming at her to run. And he thought about what she'd said, that she'd built an empire alone, that she'd made herself strong by making herself isolated. He recognized that story because he'd been living a version of it himself, keeping everyone at arm's length because losing Sarah had taught him that love was just another word for eventual devastation. But maybe they were both wrong. Maybe strength wasn't about standing alone. Maybe it was about knowing when to reach out, when to accept help, when to acknowledge that being human meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable meant being brave. The waiting room clock ticked toward 2 a.m., and Ethan stayed exactly where he'd promised to stay, waiting for Victoria Hale to come back from the edge of death he'd pulled her from, waiting to prove that sometimes, just sometimes, fear didn't get to write the ending. Outside, the rain finally stopped, and the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. The surgical waiting room existed in its own peculiar dimension of time, where minutes stretched into eternities and hours collapsed into moments. Ethan had learned this during his tours overseas, waiting for medevac helicopters that seemed to take forever and arrive too soon, waiting for news about soldiers he'd patched up and sent away, never knowing if his field treatment had been enough. He'd learned it again 3 years ago, waiting for doctors to tell him something he already knew in his bones, that Sarah was gone and no amount of medical intervention could bring her back. Tonight felt different. Tonight carried the weight of redemption. He'd moved from the plastic chair to lean against the wall near the surgical wing doors, unable to sit still, unable to do anything except replay the evening in his mind. Victoria's face when she'd first refused the hospital, the way her hand had gripped his wrist, the terror in her eyes that he'd recognized because he'd seen it in Sarah's eyes, because he'd lived with it himself for 3 long years. But this time, he'd pushed through. This time, he hadn't let fear win. A surgeon emerged through the double doors around 3:30 a.m., still in scrubs, pulling down her mask as she scanned the waiting room. She was perhaps 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of steady competence that came from years of making life and death decisions. "Family of Victoria Hale?" she called. Ethan straightened immediately. "Here. I'm here." The surgeon approached, and Ethan tried to read her expression, tried to find the answer before she spoke. Years of combat medicine had taught him to recognize the difference between good news delivered with relief and bad news delivered with practiced sympathy. "I'm Dr. Patricia Chen," she said, extending her hand. "You brought Miss Hale in?" "Yes. How is she?" "Lucky." Doctor. Chen's expression softened into something approaching a smile. "Very, very lucky. Her appendix was on the verge of rupture, probably within the hour. If you'd waited much longer, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. As it is, we got it out cleanly, no complications, no signs of infection spreading. She's in recovery now and should wake up in the next 20 to 30 minutes. The relief hit Ethan like a physical force, his knees actually weakening slightly. He steadied himself against the wall, taking a breath that felt like the first real one he'd drawn all night. She's really okay. She's really okay. We'll keep her for observation for a day or two, make sure everything's healing properly, but I expect a full recovery. No restrictions beyond the normal post-surgical protocol. Dr. Chen paused, her eyes studying him with professional curiosity. The triage nurse said you're the one who recognized the symptoms? That you have medical training? Former Army medic, 68W. Well, your training saved her life tonight. If she'd gone home, tried to sleep it off. Dr. Chen shook her head. Let's just say we see too many cases where people wait too long. You did good work. Ethan felt emotion tighten his throat. Can I see her? Once she's fully awake and we've got her settled in recovery, maybe another half hour. Dr. Chen glanced at her watch. Why don't you grab some coffee? You look like you could use it. I'll have a nurse come find you when she's ready for visitors. It was a dismissal, gentle but firm, and Ethan knew better than to argue with surgeons. He nodded, thanked Dr. Chen, and watched her disappear back through the surgical doors. Then he did exactly what she'd suggested, made his way to the hospital cafeteria, which was just beginning to show signs of life as the night shift gave way to early morning. The coffee was terrible, burned and bitter, but Ethan drank it anyway while his hand slowly stopped shaking. He checked his phone and found another message from Mrs. Chen. Maya's up and asking about you. Told her you had an emergency at the garage. She wants pancakes for breakfast. Ethan smiled despite his exhaustion and typed back. Tell her I'll be home soon and we'll make pancakes together. Extra chocolate chips. The response came immediately. She says you're the best dad ever. His eyes stung, and he blamed the terrible coffee even though he knew better. Maya had become his anchor, the reason he got out of bed every morning, the living proof that something good had survived Sarah's death. Raising her alone terrified him daily, the constant fear that he was doing it wrong, that he was failing her, that his own trauma would somehow damage her. But she was thriving despite his fears, growing into someone smart and kind and braver than he'd ever been. He wondered what Sarah would think of the man he'd become in her absence, whether she'd be proud that he'd saved someone tonight, or disappointed that it had taken 3 years and a stranger's life hanging in the balance for him to finally push past his own paralysis. Excuse me? Are you the gentleman waiting for Victoria Hale? Ethan looked up to find a young nurse standing beside his table, her scrubs decorated with cheerful cartoon characters that seemed incongruous with the pre-dawn hour. That's me. She's awake and asking for you, if you'd like to follow me. He was on his feet before she'd finished the sentence, abandoning the terrible coffee without a second thought. The nurse led him through a maze of corridors to the recovery wing, a quieter section of the hospital where patients emerged from anesthesia in curtained alcoves monitored by attentive staff. Victoria's curtain was partially open. She lay in the hospital bed, propped up at a slight angle, an IV line running to her left arm, and a blood pressure cuff automatically inflating and deflating on her right. Her hair, still damp from the rain, had been pulled back in a messy ponytail, and someone had dressed her in a hospital gown that had seen better days. Without her makeup, without the armor of her expensive clothes and cultivated confidence, she looked younger and more vulnerable than she had in the parking lot. Her eyes found Ethan the moment he appeared in the doorway, and the relief in her expression was so naked it almost hurt to witness. You stayed, she said, her voice slightly hoarse from the intubation. I promised, didn't I? Ethan approached the bed slowly, giving her space to adjust to his presence. How are you feeling? Like someone removed an organ from my body. Victoria attempted a smile. Which I suppose is accurate. Dr. Chen said you saved my life. Dr. Chen did the hard part. I just got you here. Don't do that. Victoria's voice sharpened slightly despite her obvious exhaustion. Don't minimize what you did. You found me. You convinced me to come here against every instinct I had. You stayed when you could have left a dozen times. You saved my life, Ethan. Own it. Ethan pulled up the visitor's chair and sat, his body suddenly remembering how tired it was. Okay, you're right. I helped save your life. How's that? Better? She closed her eyes briefly, and Ethan could see her fighting against the pull of pain medication and exhaustion. What time is it? Almost 4 in the morning. You should go home. You have a daughter, Maya, right? She'll be waking up soon. I've got time. Mrs. Chen's with her and she knows I had an emergency. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Besides, I told you I'd be here when you woke up. I keep my promises. Victoria studied him with those sharp, dark eyes, and Ethan had the unsettling sense that she was seeing far more than he intended to show. Why? I still don't understand why you care so much about a complete stranger. I told you. You told me about your wife, about feeling like you failed her, but that doesn't explain this, not really. You could have called an ambulance and left. You could have dropped me at the ER entrance and driven away. Instead, you stayed. You lied about being family. You waited through my surgery. She paused. No one does that without a reason. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, trying to find words for something he barely understood himself. When Sarah died, I made a promise to myself that I'd never let fear paralyze me again. That if I ever had the chance to save someone, to make a difference, I wouldn't hesitate. I wouldn't freeze. I wouldn't let the moment pass because I was too scared or too uncertain or too worried about the consequences. And I was that chance. You were that chance, he agreed. But it's more than that. Sarah used to say that we're all just walking each other home. That the whole point of being human is to show up for each other in the moments that matter. She believed that deeply, lived it every day. And when she died, I lost that sense of connection, that belief that showing up mattered. I've spent 3 years just trying to survive, just trying to raise Maya without completely falling apart, keeping everyone at a distance because it felt safer. Victoria's expression softened. And tonight changed that? Tonight reminded me that isolation isn't safety. It's just a different kind of dying. Ethan met her eyes. You reminded me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone help us. And maybe by helping you, I'm helping myself remember how to be the person Sarah believed I could be. That's a lot of weight to put on a stranger's appendicitis. Despite everything, Ethan laughed. Yeah, I guess it is, but here we are. Here we are, Victoria echoed. She shifted slightly in the bed, wincing. The surgeon said I was lucky. That if we'd waited another hour, we didn't wait. That's what matters. I almost made us wait. I almost refused to come. Her voice dropped. I was so scared, Ethan. I thought I'd moved past that fear. Thought I'd built myself into someone strong enough that old traumas didn't control me anymore. But the second I saw those hospital doors, I was 7 years old again, sitting in a waiting room, watching my whole world fall apart. Trauma doesn't work that way. It doesn't care how successful you are or how much time has passed. It just sits there waiting for the right trigger, and then it hits you like you're right back in that moment. Ethan knew this intimately. The important thing is you didn't let it win. You were terrified and you walked through those doors anyway. Because you pushed me. Because you chose to trust me. There's a difference. A nurse appeared to check Victoria's vital signs, making notes on a tablet while asking routine questions about pain levels and nausea. Victoria answered mechanically, and Ethan could see exhaustion pulling at her, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally depleting. When the nurse left, Victoria turned back to Ethan. Tell me about Maya. What's she like? Stubborn, smart, way too observant for her own good. Ethan's expression softened the way it always did when he talked about his daughter. She looks exactly like Sarah. Same blonde hair, same green eyes, same smile that could convince you to do just about anything. But she's got my stubbornness, which Sarah used to say was both a blessing and a curse. How's she handling everything, growing up without her mother? Some days better than others. She doesn't remember much. She was only 5 when Sarah died. I've tried to keep Sarah's memory alive, show her pictures, tell her stories. But I worry that Maya's growing up with a ghost instead of a mother, that my grief is somehow stunting her ability to just be a kid. Or maybe your love is giving her something to build on, Victoria suggested quietly. Maybe she's lucky to have a father who shows up for her every single day, who clearly adores her, who's trying his best even when it's hard. I hope so. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together, like one wrong move and the whole carefully constructed life I've built will fall apart. That's called being a parent. At least that's what I've heard. Victoria's eyes were starting to drift closed despite her obvious effort to stay awake. I never had children. Always told myself it was because I was too focused on building the company, too busy, too driven. But the truth is I was scared. Scared of failing them the way I felt my parents failed me. Scared of loving someone that much and losing them. It's terrifying, Ethan admitted. Every single day I'm terrified something will happen to Maya, that I'll fail her, that she'll grow up and realize how inadequate I was as a parent. But she's also the best thing that ever happened to me. She's the reason I'm still here. Victoria's hand moved slightly on the hospital blanket, and without thinking, Ethan reached over and took it. Her fingers were warm now, no longer the ice cold they'd been in the rain, and she squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," she said, her words starting to slur slightly as the pain medication pulled her under. "Not just for tonight, for reminding me that sometimes the scariest thing is also the right thing." "Get some rest," Ethan said gently. "I'll be here when you wake up." "You keep saying that." "Because I keep meaning it." Victoria's eyes closed, and within moments her breathing had evened out into the deeper rhythm of medicated sleep. Ethan sat there holding her hand, watching the monitors chart her heartbeat and oxygen levels, proof that she was alive and healing and safe. The sky outside the window had shifted from black to deep purple, the first hints of dawn painting the horizon. Ethan thought about calling Mrs. Chen to let her know he'd be a while longer, but his phone showed 4:47 a.m. and he didn't want to wake anyone. Instead, he settled deeper into the uncomfortable visitor's chair, his hand still holding Victoria's, and let himself just exist in this moment of quiet victory. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, someone was gently shaking his shoulder. Ethan jerked awake, disoriented, his combat instincts kicking in before his conscious mind caught up. The hand on his shoulder belonged to the same nurse from earlier, and she held up her other hand in a calming gesture. "Easy there. Didn't mean to startle you. Just wanted to let you know we're moving Ms. Hale to a regular room. You're welcome to follow, if you'd like." Ethan glanced at Victoria, who was still sleeping peacefully, then at the window where full daylight now streamed through. "What time is it?" "Just past 7. You've been out for a couple hours." He'd slept in a hospital chair holding a stranger's hand. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him, but neither was the rightness of it. "Yeah, I'd like to follow. Thank you." The process of moving Victoria involved a small army of staff and equipment, a carefully choreographed dance that Ethan observed from a respectful distance. She stirred slightly during the transfer but didn't fully wake, and within 20 minutes she was settled in a private room on the surgical floor with a window overlooking the hospital's parking lot. Ethan claimed the visitor's chair again, this time positioned where he could see both Victoria and the door. His phone showed 7 messages from Mrs. Chen, the most recent one sent 10 minutes ago. "Maya's asking when you'll be home. Want me to tell her anything specific?" He typed back, "Tell her I'm helping someone who got hurt. I'll be home by noon at the latest. Save me some pancakes." "Will do. She's already covered in chocolate chips and syrup. Fair warning." Ethan smiled and pocketed his phone. Maya would have questions. She always did. But she'd also understand. He'd been honest with her from the beginning about what had happened to Sarah, age-appropriate but truthful, and as a result, Maya had developed an unusual empathy for other people's pain. Sometimes Ethan worried he'd forced her to grow up too fast, but mostly he was just grateful she was turning into such a good human. "You're still here." Victoria's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was awake, more alert now than she'd been in recovery, her dark eyes tracking his movements with that same sharp intelligence he'd noticed in the parking lot. "Told you I would be," he Ethan said. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck that was also on fire." She shifted carefully in the bed, testing her range of motion. "But alive. Which I suppose is the important part." "Definitely the important part." Ethan leaned forward. "They moved you to a regular room about half an hour ago. The nurse said Dr. Chen will be by later this morning to check on you." "What time is it?" 7:30. Tuesday morning technically became Wednesday morning while you were sleeping. Victoria processed this, her expression shifting through several emotions Ethan couldn't quite name. "You stayed all night. You missed a whole night with your daughter." "Maya's fine. She's with my neighbor eating pancakes and probably destroying my apartment with syrup. I'll be home soon." He paused. "Besides, I made a promise. I don't break those." Most people would have left once the surgery was over, once they knew I was okay. "I'm not most people." "No," Victoria agreed quietly. "You're really not." She looked down at her hands, picking at the hospital bracelet on her wrist. "I've spent the last decade building a company, building a reputation, building walls so high that nothing could touch me. And in one night, a stranger with a tow truck and grease under his fingernails knocked them all down. I drive an F-150, not a tow truck." "You know what I mean." She looked up at him. "Why aren't you scared of me? Everyone's scared of me. I've cultivated that. The Ice Queen CEO who doesn't need anyone. But you just showed up and refused to let me be that person." Ethan considered this. "Maybe because I saw you at your most vulnerable. Hard to be scared of someone when you've literally carried them to your truck in the rain while they were in agony. Kind of strips away all the pretense." "That's fair." Victoria attempted a smile. "Though I feel I should warn you that once I'm out of this hospital gown and back in my actual clothes, the Ice Queen might make a reappearance." "I'll take my chances." They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that felt earned rather than awkward. Ethan watched the morning light play across Victoria's face, softening the sharp edges that fear and pain had carved there the night before. She looked younger like this, more at peace, like maybe the surgery had removed more than just an inflamed appendix. Maybe it had cut away some of the armor, too. "I should let you rest," Ethan said finally, checking his watch. "And I should get home to Maya before she decides to redecorate the entire apartment with breakfast foods." "You're leaving?" The flash of panic in Victoria's eyes was quickly suppressed, but Ethan saw it anyway. "Just for a few hours. I need to check on Maya, take a shower, change into clothes that don't smell like motor oil and rain. But I'll come back this afternoon if you'd like. Bring you something that isn't hospital food." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Ethan stood, stretching muscles that had gone stiff from too many hours in uncomfortable chairs. "Unless you'd prefer I didn't. I don't want to overstep." Victoria was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with something internal. When she spoke, her voice was small, uncertain in a way that seemed foreign to her. "I'd like it if you came back, if that's not too much trouble." "It's not trouble at all." Ethan pulled out his phone. "Here, let me give you my number. If you need anything before I get back, just call or text." They exchanged numbers, a strangely mundane gesture given the circumstances of how they'd met. Victoria saved his contact with careful attention, her fingers moving slowly across the phone's screen like she was committing something to memory. "Ethan?" she called as he reached the door. "Thank you. For everything." "You already thanked me." "I'll probably thank you 100 more times before this is over. Get used to it." He smiled. "I can live with that. Get some rest, Victoria. I'll see you this afternoon." The drive home felt surreal, the morning commute traffic building around him while his mind remained stuck in that hospital room. Ethan kept replaying the night, the moment he'd seen Victoria collapsed in the parking lot, the fear in her eyes, the way her hand had gripped his, the relief when Dr. Chen had said she'd be okay. It felt significant in a way that extended beyond the immediate crisis, like something fundamental had shifted in the universe, and he was only beginning to understand the implications. Mrs. Chen met him at his apartment door, her round face creased with concern. "You look terrible. Did you sleep at all?" "Couple hours in a chair. I'll survive." Ethan glanced past her to where Maya sat at the kitchen table, covered in syrup and chocolate chips exactly as advertised. How was she? Perfect as always. Worried about you, though. Kept asking questions about the emergency. Mrs. Chen lowered her voice. I told her someone needed help with their car, and you stayed to make sure they were okay. Hope that was all right. That's perfect. Thank you. Ethan pulled out his wallet, but Mrs. Chen waved him off. Don't insult me. You know I don't charge for Maya. That girl's my favorite person in this building. She patted his arm. Go be with your daughter and take a shower. You smell like a hospital. Maya launched herself at Ethan the moment Mrs. Chen left, her small arms wrapping around his waist, with enough force to nearly knock him over. He hugged her back, breathing in the scent of chocolate chips and strawberry shampoo, letting the simple reality of her presence ground him. You were gone all night, Maya said, her voice muffled against his shirt. Mrs. Chen said someone needed help, but I was worried. I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry. Ethan crouched down to her level, wiping a smear of syrup from her cheek. But everyone's okay now. Sometimes grown-ups have emergencies that take longer to fix than we expect. Maya studied his face with those two perceptive green eyes. Was it a car emergency? Started as one, yeah. But then it turned into something else? Ethan smiled despite his exhaustion. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart, Dad. You just don't always notice because you're busy with the garage. She said it matter-of-factly, without accusation. Are you going to go back to help more? This afternoon, yeah. The person I helped last night is still in the hospital, and I promised I'd check on them. Is it a boy or a girl? A woman. Her name's Victoria. Maya absorbed this information with the seriousness she applied to everything. Is she nice? I think so, yeah. She's had a rough time, but she's strong. Like Mom was strong? The question hit Ethan squarely in the chest. Maya rarely brought up Sarah unprompted, preferring to let Ethan control the narrative of her mother's memory. Yeah, baby, like Mom was strong. Maya nodded, satisfied with this answer. Okay, you should help her then. But you should also shower because Mrs. Chen's right. You smell weird. Ethan laughed, the sound surprising him. Fair enough. How about you help me make lunch, and then I'll clean up? They spent the next hour together in the kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, while Maya chattered about school and her friend Emma's upcoming birthday party and the book she was reading about space exploration. Ethan let her voice wash over him, participating in the conversation but mostly just grateful to be home, to be reminded of why he worked so hard, why he kept pushing forward even when everything felt impossible. After lunch, while Maya settled in with her book, Ethan finally took that shower. He stood under the hot water until it started to run cold, letting the night's tension drain away with the soap and shampoo. When he emerged, he felt almost human again, tired still, but functional. His phone showed a text from an unknown number. This is Victoria. Dr. Chen came by. Everything looks good. They're saying I can go home tomorrow if there are no complications. Ethan typed back. That's great news. I'll be there around 2 if that works for you. You really don't have to come back. I'm fine. I know I don't have to. See you at 2. He dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt that Maya had insisted he buy last year because you need at least one shirt without holes in it, Dad. Then he sat down with Maya to explain where he was going. So Victoria's in the hospital, he said carefully, and she doesn't have any family here to visit her. I thought I'd stop by, make sure she's doing okay. Is that all right with you? Maya considered this with her usual thoughtfulness. Is she lonely? Maybe a little. Then you should definitely go. Nobody should be lonely in a hospital. She paused. Can I draw her a picture? To make her feel better? Ethan felt his throat tighten. I think she'd really like that, sweetheart. Maya disappeared into her room and emerged 10 minutes later with a carefully colored drawing of a rainbow arcing over a hospital building. At the bottom, in her careful third-grade handwriting, she'd written, Hope you feel better soon, from Maya. This is perfect, Ethan said, folding it carefully. Thank you, baby. Tell her I said hi, and that hospitals aren't so scary if you have friends visiting. Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds, Ethan thought. He kissed the top of Maya's head, confirmed with Mrs. Chen that she could watch Maya for another few hours, and headed back out into the afternoon. The hospital felt different in daylight, busier, more purposeful, less like a place where time stopped and more like a place where lives continued. Ethan navigated the now familiar corridors to Victoria's room, stopping at the gift shop to grab a bottle of fancy water and a magazine about technology startups that seemed like it might be her speed. He knocked on her doorframe before entering. "Delivery service." Victoria looked up from her phone, and Ethan was struck by how much better she looked. The color had returned to her face, and though she still moved carefully, there was a brightness to her eyes that hadn't been there this morning. "You came back," she said, and there was something almost wondering in her tone. "I said I would." Ethan held up the magazine. "Figured you'd be going crazy without something to read, and I brought this." He pulled out Maya's drawing. "My daughter wanted you to have it." Victoria took the picture with careful hands, her expression shifting as she read Maya's message. When she looked up, her eyes were suspiciously bright. "She drew this for me?" "She wanted you to know hospitals aren't so scary when you have friends visiting. Her words, not mine." "She sounds wonderful." "She is." Ethan settled into the visitor's chair, which he was starting to think of as his chair, given how much time he'd spent in it. "How are you really feeling?" "No corporate spin, just the truth." "Sore, tired, overwhelmed." Victoria set the drawing on her bedside table where she could see it. "Dr. Chen said the surgery went perfectly. No complications, no signs of infection. I should be able to go home tomorrow and return to work in about 2 weeks." "That's fast." "I heal quickly, always have." She paused. "I've also been lying here thinking about what you said last night, about showing up for people, about not letting fear write the ending." "And?" "And I think maybe I've spent the last decade running from the wrong things. I built this empire because I was terrified of being vulnerable again, terrified of needing anyone, terrified of ending up like my mother, powerless and dependent and ultimately alone. But in protecting myself from those things, I became alone anyway. Just a different kind of alone." Ethan recognized that realization. He'd been circling it himself for 3 years. It's easier to keep people at a distance than to risk losing them. "Easier," Victoria agreed, "but not better. Not healthier. Not actually safer." She looked at him. "You're the first person in years who's seen me when I wasn't in control, when I couldn't hide behind my company or my money or my reputation. And you didn't run away. You didn't treat me differently. You just helped. That's what people are supposed to do for each other." "Supposed to, maybe. But don't actually do. Not in my world. In my world, vulnerability is weakness, and weakness is fatal." She laughed, the sound bitter. "I've made millions consulting companies on how to be more efficient, more profitable, more successful. But I don't know the first thing about being human." "I don't believe that." "You should. It's true." Victoria's fingers traced the edge of Maya's drawing. "I have hundreds of employees and thousands of clients and exactly 0 friends. I can't remember the last time someone asked how I was doing and actually wanted to know the answer. I've built this perfect, controlled, isolated life, and last night I nearly died in it." Ethan let the words settle between them, understanding that sometimes people needed to speak their truths out loud before they could figure out what to do with them. "So what are you going to do about it?" "I have absolutely no idea." Victoria met his eyes. "But I think maybe the first step is admitting it, and the second step is asking for help when I need it instead of pretending I never do." "Those are good steps," says the man who stayed up all night in a hospital for a stranger. "You're not a stranger anymore, Ethan pointed out. "Strangers don't hold hands through surgery scares. Strangers don't exchange phone numbers and drawings from 8-year-olds. Victoria smiled, and it transformed her face, softening all those carefully constructed edges. "So what are we then?" "Friends, maybe? If you're interested in having one of those." "I might be very bad at it." "I'm out of practice myself. We can figure it out together." They talked for the next 2 hours, the conversation flowing with surprising ease. Victoria told him about building Hale Innovations from nothing, about the early days when she'd lived on ramen and coffee and sheer determination, about the first big client she'd landed and the terror of suddenly having employees who depended on her, about the loneliness of success and how it differed from the loneliness of failure but still felt like drowning. Ethan told her about his time in the army, about the camaraderie and the horror and the way combat changed you in ways you couldn't undo, about meeting Sarah at a veterans support group and falling in love with someone who understood trauma because she carried her own, about Maya's birth and the joy that had felt impossible given everything they'd been through, about Sarah's death and the years since, trying to be both mother and father to a daughter who deserved so much better. She deserves exactly what she's getting, Victoria said firmly when he voiced this last thought. A father who loves her enough to work 3 jobs keeping a business afloat just to give her stability. A father who notices when people are in pain and stops to help. A father who keeps his promises even when it's hard. Maya's lucky to have you. Some days I'm not sure she'd agree. All kids think their parents are embarrassing or insufficient in some way. It's practically their job. But she drew you a picture to give to a stranger because she wanted to help someone feel better. That doesn't come from nowhere, Ethan. That comes from being raised by someone who taught her that other people matter. Ethan felt the compliment settle somewhere deep, filling a space he hadn't realized was empty. Thank you for saying that. I'm just stating facts. Victoria shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. Though I should probably rest before the nurses start giving me disapproving looks. Dr. Chen was very clear about not overdoing it. Ethan stood, reluctant to leave but understanding the necessity. I should get back to Maya anyway. Mrs. Chen's probably wondering if I've moved into the hospital permanently. Will you come back tomorrow, when they discharge me? The question came quickly, almost nervously, like Victoria was afraid of the answer. Do you want me to? I don't have anyone else to call. My assistant could arrange a car service, but that feels... She broke off. Yes, I'd like you to come back, if you can. What time? Dr. Chen said probably around noon. I'll be here. Victoria smiled, and Ethan was struck again by how different she looked from the woman he'd found collapsed in the rain. You're very good at this. At what? Showing up, being reliable, making people feel like they matter. She paused. Has anyone ever told you that? Sarah used to, but I figured she was biased. She was right, though. About you. About showing up for people. Victoria's eyes were starting to drift closed, exhaustion and pain medication pulling her under. Thank you, Ethan, for saving my life and for making me want to figure out what to do with it now that I still have it. Ethan left her sleeping, Maya's rainbow drawing still carefully positioned where Victoria could see it when she woke. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, not quite healing, but maybe the beginning of both. He'd come to the hospital last night prepared to save a life. He hadn't expected that in doing so, he might start figuring out how to save his own. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that followed a storm. The city washed clean and gleaming under a blue sky that seemed almost aggressively cheerful. Ethan woke before his alarm, his internal clock still calibrated to the anxious rhythms of the past 36 hours. Maya was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with her cereal bowl and a nature documentary playing quietly on the television. You're up early, Ethan observed, settling onto the couch beside her spot on the floor. Couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Victoria. Maya didn't look away from the screen where a narrator was describing the migration patterns of Arctic terns. Is she getting out of the hospital today? That's the plan. I'm going to pick her up around noon. And then what happens? It was a simple question that Ethan didn't have a simple answer for. I'm not sure, sweetheart. She'll go home, rest, get better. We'll probably stay in touch. Maya finally turned to look at him, her expression serious in that way that always made her seem older than 8. Do you like her? I barely know her. That's not what I asked. Maya had inherited Sarah's ability to cut through deflection with surgical precision. Do you like her? Ethan considered lying, then remembered his promise to always be honest with his daughter. Yeah, I think I do. She's smart and brave and funny in a sharp kind of way, but it's complicated, Maya. We met under really unusual circumstances. Mom always said the best things usually are complicated. Maya returned her attention to the television. I think it's okay if you like her. I think Mom would want you to like people again. The observation hit Ethan squarely in the chest, stealing his breath. He'd spent 3 years carefully maintaining Sarah's memory while simultaneously using it as a shield against connection convincing himself that moving forward would somehow dishonor what they'd had. But Maya was right. Sarah had been all about forward motion, about choosing life even when it was hard, about finding joy wherever it existed. "When did you get so wise?" he managed. Maya shrugged, a small smile playing at her lips. "I've always been wise. You just don't always listen." Ethan spent the morning at the garage, though his heart wasn't in it. He finished up Mrs. Patterson's Volvo, returned calls from 2 potential customers, and tried to focus on the transmission rebuild waiting in Bay 2. But his mind kept drifting to Victoria, to hospital rooms and parking lot confessions, to the way she'd looked at Maya's drawing like it was something precious. At 11:30, he cleaned up, changed into the one good shirt Maya approved of, and headed back to County General for what felt like the 100th time in 2 days. The hospital had become strangely familiar, its corridors and sounds no longer foreign, but simply part of this new reality he'd stumbled into. Victoria was dressed when he arrived, back in clothes that looked expensive even after spending a night crumpled in a hospital bag. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she'd somehow managed to apply makeup that made her look professional rather than like someone who'd undergone emergency surgery less than 48 hours ago. But Ethan could see the careful way she held herself, the slight tightness around her eyes that spoke to pain she was determined not to show. "You look ready to conquer the world," he said from the doorway. She turned, and her expression softened when she saw him. "I look ready to get out of this hospital before I lose my mind. There's a difference." "Fair point." Ethan entered the room, noting the discharge paperwork already signed and stacked neatly on the bedside table. "Dr. Chen already been by?" "An hour ago. Gave me approximately 17 lectures about rest, medication schedules, warning signs to watch for, and the importance of not returning to work immediately." Victoria picked up her purse with careful movements. "I listened politely and agreed to everything while planning to ignore at least half of it." Victoria, "I'm kidding, mostly." She managed a smile. "I'll rest. I'll take the medication. I'll watch for warning signs." But the moment Dr. Chen said 2 weeks before returning to work, I knew that was optimistic at best. "I have a company to run. A company that will survive without you for a few days." "You sound very confident about that." "I sound like someone who just watched you nearly die from appendicitis because you were too stubborn to admit you needed help." Ethan kept his voice gentle but firm. "Maybe consider the possibility that the world won't end if you take care of yourself for once." Victoria studied him with those sharp, dark eyes, and Ethan had the sense she was weighing something, making calculations he couldn't quite follow. "You're going to be insufferable about this, aren't you?" "Absolutely. Get used to it." A nurse appeared with a wheelchair. "Hospital policy," she explained, even though Victoria insisted she could walk perfectly fine. The ride down to the main entrance was quiet, Victoria's jaw set with the kind of determination Ethan recognized from combat medics who refused to admit they were injured. Pride and pain made for difficult companions. His truck was parked in the pickup zone, and Ethan helped Victoria into the passenger seat with the same careful attention he'd used 2 nights ago in the rain. She didn't protest the assistance, which told him more about her actual condition than any words could. "Where to?" he asked once he'd climbed into the driver's seat. Victoria rattled off an address in the Marina District, one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods where houses started at several million and climbed rapidly from there. Ethan shouldn't have been surprised, but something about knowing exactly how different their worlds were made the gap feel wider. They drove in silence for the first few minutes, Ethan navigating through midday traffic while Victoria stared out the window at the passing city. Finally, she spoke without looking at him. "I've been thinking about what happens next. After today." "And what did you come up with?" "That I don't want this to be the end of something. I want it to be the beginning." She turned to face him. "I know we're from completely different worlds. I know this whole situation is bizarre and probably violates several social conventions about how strangers are supposed to interact. But you saved my life, Ethan. And in doing that, you made me want to figure out what kind of life is actually worth living." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening that he'd kept locked for 3 years. "I'd like that too. The beginning part, I mean. Even though I'm terrible at having friends and will probably mess this up spectacularly. Besides, I'm out of practice myself. We can mess it up together. Victoria smiled, and it reached her eyes this time, genuine and unguarded. Deal. The Marina District revealed itself in carefully manicured streets and houses that looked like they belonged in architectural magazines. Victoria directed him to a modern 3-story home with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the bay that probably cost more than Ethan would make in a lifetime. He pulled into the circular driveway, trying not to feel intimidated by the sheer wealth on display. "Welcome to my fortress of solitude," Victoria said with a touch of irony. "It's probably too much house for one person, but I bought it because I could, and because it proved something I felt needed proving at the time. And now? Now it mostly just echoes." She reached for the door handle, then paused. Would you mind coming in? Just for a few minutes? I know you need to get back to Maya, but I'd feel better knowing someone saw me safely inside." It was a reasonable request that they both knew was about more than physical safety. Victoria didn't want to walk into that empty house alone. Didn't want to face the silence and isolation she'd built so carefully. Ethan understood that intimately. "Of course," he said. "Let me help you." Getting Victoria from the truck to her front door required more effort than she wanted to admit, each step measured and careful. Ethan kept one hand at her elbow, ready to catch her if she stumbled, while Victoria maintained the fiction that she was fine. The house's security system beeped as she entered the code, and then they were inside. The interior matched the exterior, all clean lines and expensive materials, and the kind of deliberate minimalism that came from having too much money and not enough warmth. Abstract art hung on white walls. Designer furniture occupied carefully measured spaces. Everything was perfect, and nothing felt lived in, like a showroom waiting for actual people to arrive and mess it up. "It's beautiful," Ethan said, because it was, even if it felt cold. "It's empty," Victoria corrected, lowering herself onto a pristine white couch with a barely suppressed wince. "I keep meaning to make it feel more like a home, but I don't actually know what that means. I didn't grow up with much, and then I had too much. And somewhere in between I forgot what normal looked like." Ethan glanced around the space, noting the absence of photographs, personal mementos, anything that would tell a visitor who actually lived here. Even his modest apartment had Maya's drawings on the refrigerator, Sarah's favorite books on the shelves, evidence of lives being lived rather than curated. "Can I get you anything?" he asked. "Water, medication, blanket?" "There's a bottle of prescription painkillers in my purse, and maybe some water." Victoria leaned back against the couch cushions, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "And possibly a different life, but I suspect that's harder to deliver." Ethan found a glass in the gleaming kitchen. It took him 3 tries to find the right cabinet, and filled it with water. Victoria's purse yielded the medication bottle, and he brought both back to the living room. She took the pills with mechanical efficiency, then closed her eyes. "I hate feeling weak," she said quietly. "I've spent my entire adult life making sure I never had to depend on anyone for anything. And now here I am, unable to walk to my own front door without help." "That's not weakness. That's recovery from surgery." "It feels like weakness." Ethan settled into the chair across from her, giving her space but staying present. "After I came back from my last tour, I couldn't do basic things, couldn't sleep through the night, couldn't go to the grocery store without having a panic attack in the cereal aisle, couldn't hold Maya without my hand shaking because I was so afraid I'd hurt her somehow. I felt useless and broken, and like everyone would be better off if I just disappeared." Victoria's eyes opened. "What changed?" "Sarah refused to let me disappear. She'd sit with me through the panic attacks, wake me up from nightmares, drag me to therapy even when I insisted I was fine. She made it clear that needing help wasn't optional and wasn't shameful. It was just part of being human." Ethan's voice roughened. "She saved my life long before you needed me to save yours. And she did it by showing me that accepting help was actually braver than suffering alone." "She sounds like an extraordinary person." "She was. And she'd tell you the same thing I'm telling you now, that you don't have to do this alone. That asking for help isn't giving up control, it's choosing to trust someone else to share the load." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the couch cushion. "I don't know how to do that. Trust people, I mean. The last person I truly trusted was my mother, and she died and left me alone. Everything since then has been about making sure I never need anyone enough that losing them would destroy me. And how's that working out? Spectacularly poorly, as evidenced by the fact that I nearly died alone in a parking lot. She laughed, the sound brittle. You'd think a near-death experience would come with some sort of instruction manual. Congratulations on surviving. Here's how to rebuild your entire life from scratch. I don't think it works that way. I think you just take it one day at a time and try to make slightly better choices than you did yesterday. Ethan leaned forward. And maybe you start by accepting that you don't have to rebuild alone. You've got at least one friend now, whether you planned for it or not. One friend who's a single father with a failing business and approximately zero free time. The business isn't failing, it's struggling. There's a difference. Ethan smiled. And I've got more free time than you'd think. Turns out when you spend 3 years avoiding meaningful human connection, your social calendar stays pretty open. Victoria shook her head, but she was smiling too. We're a mess, aren't we? Both of us just stumbling around trying to figure out how to be functional adults while carrying approximately metric tons of trauma and fear. Probably, but at least we're a mess together now. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Mrs. Chen says you need to come home soon because I have piano practice at 3. Also, I made another drawing for Victoria. This one has dolphins. Ethan showed Victoria the message, and her expression softened in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. You should go. Your daughter needs you. Will you be okay here alone? I've been alone in this house for 5 years. A few more hours won't kill me. She paused. Though I appreciate you asking. Ethan stood reluctantly, part of him not wanting to leave her in this cold, empty space. Promise me you'll call if you need anything at all. I promise. Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at asking for help. Then it's a good thing I'm excellent at showing up uninvited. He pulled out his phone. I'm putting my number in your favorites. First contact, right at the top. If you need me, you call. Don't debate it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Just call. Victoria watched him program his number with an expression he couldn't quite read. Why are you doing this? Really? You could have dropped me at the door and driven away. You could have visited once in the hospital and considered your good deed done. But you keep showing up, keep pushing, keep making it clear you're not going anywhere. Why? Ethan thought about deflecting, about giving some easy answer that would preserve distance and safety. But Victoria deserved better than that, and maybe so did he. Because 3 years ago I let someone I loved suffer alone because I was too afraid to push past her fear. And she died, and I've carried that failure every single day since. When I saw you in that parking lot when you said you couldn't go to the hospital, he broke off, collecting himself. I saw a chance to make a different choice, to not let fear win. And then, when I got to know you, when I saw how brave you were despite being terrified, when I realized how lonely you were despite all your success, I saw someone worth knowing, someone worth showing up for. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brilliant and driven and scared. I know you built something incredible from nothing. I know you've spent years protecting yourself by keeping everyone at a distance, and I know how exhausting that is because I've been doing the same thing. Ethan held her gaze. And I know that for the first time in 3 years, I actually want to try. To connect with someone, to build something that looks like friendship, to remember what it feels like to care about someone who isn't my daughter. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. What if I disappoint you? What if I can't be the friend you deserve? What if you can? What if we both can? He smiled gently. We won't know unless we try. She nodded slowly, processing this. Okay, we'll try. But don't say I didn't warn you when I inevitably messed this up. Duly noted. Ethan headed for the door, then paused. I'll check in tomorrow. And Victoria? Try to rest. Actually rest. Not whatever workaholic version of rest you're planning. I make no promises. I didn't expect you to. The drive home felt different, lighter somehow, like something heavy Ethan had been carrying had shifted position. He thought about Victoria in that enormous empty house, about Maya waiting for him with dolphin drawings, about the strange and unlikely friendship that had emerged from a rainy parking lot in a moment of crisis. Maya was waiting at the apartment door when he arrived, practically vibrating with excitement. Did you give her my first drawing? Did she like it? I made another one with dolphins because Emma said dolphins are the smartest animals except for humans and maybe octopuses. She loved the rainbow drawing, had it right beside her bed where she could see it. Ethan scooped Maya into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. And I'm sure she'll love the dolphins too. Can we take it to her? I want to meet her. The request caught Ethan off guard. He'd been keeping his worlds carefully separate. Maya on one side, Victoria on the other, the garage in its own category entirely. The thought of bringing them together felt significant in a way that made him nervous. Maybe soon, he said carefully. She's still recovering from surgery. She needs rest right now. Maya studied his face with those two perceptive eyes. You like her a lot, don't you? I told you, I barely know her. But you want to know her. I can tell. Maya twisted in his arms to look at him directly. It's okay, Dad. You're allowed to have friends who aren't me or Mrs. Chen. When did you get so wise about my social life? Someone has to be. She squirmed down from his embrace. Come on, we're going to be late for piano. Miss Nakamura gets cranky when we're late. They made it to piano practice with 3 minutes to spare, and Ethan spent the next hour in Miss Nakamura's waiting room answering emails and trying to figure out the delicate balance between running a garage, raising a daughter, and maintaining a friendship with someone who lived in a completely different world. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Thank you for getting me home safely, and for everything else. I'm resting, I promise. Well, resting while reviewing quarterly reports, but it's a start. Ethan smiled and typed back. Baby steps. Though I'm confiscating your laptop if I find out you're working. You'd have to get past my security system first. I got a combat medic through your front door. I think I can handle a security system. Fair point. Fine, I'll actually rest, but only because standing up makes my incision hurt. Whatever motivates you, get some sleep. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Ethan would drop Maya at school, put in hours at the garage, then text Victoria to check in. Sometimes she'd respond immediately with sardonic observations about daytime television or complaints about her prescribed rest. Other times hours would pass before she replied, usually with apologies about falling asleep mid-text or getting distracted by work emails she absolutely wasn't supposed to be reading. On Thursday, Maya insisted they make cookies for Victoria. Because cookies make everything better, and she's probably sad being alone in that big house. She'd explained with 8-year-old logic that Ethan couldn't argue with. So they'd spent the evening covered in flour and chocolate chips, producing 3 dozen cookies that were slightly burned around the edges, but made with enough love to compensate. Friday afternoon, Ethan texted Victoria. Maya and I made you something. Can we drop by? The response came quickly. You really don't have to keep checking on me. I know. Can we drop by anyway? Yes, please. I'm losing my mind here. Maya chattered the entire drive to the Marina District, excited and nervous about finally meeting the woman from the hospital. Ethan found himself equally nervous for reasons he didn't want to examine too closely. This felt significant. Introducing his daughter to someone new, bringing his two worlds together, admitting that Victoria had become important enough to warrant this step. Victoria answered the door looking better than she had 3 days ago, but still carefully guarded in her movements. She dressed in casual clothes, expensive casual but still more relaxed than the business attire Ethan had seen her in. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Maya standing beside him. You must be Maya, Victoria said, and Ethan heard her voice soften in a way he'd never heard before. I loved your drawings. The rainbow one is on my refrigerator. Maya beamed. I made you cookies too. Dad helped, but I did most of the mixing. Some of them are a little burned, but they still taste good. I'm sure they're perfect. Victoria stepped back to let them in, and Ethan noticed she'd made an effort to make the space feel less sterile. A throw blanket draped over the couch, a few books stacked on the coffee table, signs of actual human habitation. Maya handed over the container of cookies with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for presenting royal gifts. Victoria accepted them with appropriate solemnity, then suggested they eat a few now with milk. The three of them ended up in her enormous kitchen, Maya perched on a bar stool swinging her legs while Victoria and Ethan leaned against the counter. These are delicious, Victoria said after her first bite, and she sounded genuinely surprised. When's the last time I had homemade cookies? Actually, I don't think I've ever had homemade cookies. Never? Maya's eyes went wide with shock. Not even when you were little? My mother wasn't really the baking type. We didn't have much money, and she worked a lot. Victoria's expression turned distant. After she died, I lived with my father, but he was always traveling for work. The housekeeper made dinner sometimes, but nothing like this. Maya considered this with her usual seriousness. That's sad. Everyone should have homemade cookies at least sometimes. We can make you more if you want. Dad and I bake a lot because it's fun and because it makes the apartment smell good. I'd like that very much. They spent the next hour in easy conversation, Maya telling Victoria about school and her friend Emma and the book about space she was reading. Victoria listened with genuine attention, asking questions that showed she was actually interested rather than just being polite. Ethan watched the two of them interact and felt something settle in his chest, some tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying finally releasing. Eventually, Maya wandered off to explore Victoria's house, leaving the adults alone in the kitchen. Victoria turned to Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She's wonderful," Victoria said quietly. "Smart and kind and so confident. You're raising an incredible human." "I'm trying. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together." "You're doing more than that. She's happy, Ethan. You can see it in everything about her. She feels safe and loved and free to just be a kid." Victoria's voice caught slightly. "I don't remember ever feeling that way. It's not too late, you know. To figure out what makes you happy, to feel safe, to build something that looks like joy instead of just success." "Is that what we're doing? Building joy?" Ethan considered this. "Maybe. Or at least laying the foundation for it." Maya reappeared then, announcing that Victoria's house was really big but kind of empty except for the view, which is amazing. With 8-year-old diplomacy, she suggested that Victoria needed more colors, maybe some plants, definitely more pictures on the walls. "You're absolutely right," Victoria agreed. "Maybe you could help me figure out what to add. I'm not very good at making places feel like home." Maya's face lit up. "Really? I could draw you more pictures, and Dad knows about plants because we have 6 plants at home, and only one of them has died." "High praise," Victoria said to Ethan with barely suppressed amusement. "The one that died was Maya's responsibility, and she forgot to water it for 3 weeks. I consider 5 out of 6 a victory." They left as the sun was setting, Maya clutching a promise from Victoria that they'd have another cookie session soon. In the truck, Maya was quiet for a few minutes before speaking. "I like her, Dad. She's sad, but she's trying not to be, and I think that's brave." Ethan glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, once again startled by her perceptiveness. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think that's brave too. Are you going to keep being her friend, even though she's rich and lives in a fancy house?" "Why would that matter?" Maya shrugged. "I don't know. On TV, rich people and regular people don't usually be friends. But I think you should anyway because she needs friends, and you need friends, and it doesn't matter about the money stuff." "You're right. It doesn't matter about the money stuff." "I'm right about most things," Maya said matter-of-factly. "You should listen to me more often." That night after Maya was asleep, Ethan's phone rang. Victoria's name appeared on the screen, and he answered immediately. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." Victoria's voice sounded different, lighter, less guarded. "I just wanted to thank you for bringing Maya over, for letting me meet her. She's extraordinary, Ethan." "She liked you too. Apparently you're sad but trying not to be, which makes you brave in her assessment." Victoria laughed, the sound genuine and unforced. "She's not wrong. About the sad part or the trying part." She paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you do it? Balance everything? The garage, raising Maya, being present for her while dealing with your own grief and trauma? Some days I can barely manage running a company, and that's with a staff of hundreds helping me. You're doing it all alone." "I'm not doing it alone. I have Mrs. Chen, Maya's teachers, the other parents at her school. I have people who show up when I need them, even if I'm terrible at asking." Ethan settled deeper into his couch. "And I've learned that perfection isn't the goal. Presence is. Maya doesn't need a perfect father. She needs one who shows up, who tries, who loves her enough to keep pushing forward even when it's hard." I don't know if I know how to do that. Show up for people, I mean. You're doing it right now. You showed up for Maya today, made her feel important, listened to her ideas about your house. That counts. It felt easy with her, natural. She's so open and genuine that it's impossible not to respond to that. Victoria's voice softened. With adults, it's harder. I've spent so many years being guarded that I don't know how to let people in anymore. Start small. Start with one person who already knows your worst moments and is still showing up anyway. You mean you. I mean me. Victoria was quiet for a moment, and Ethan could hear her breathing, could imagine her in that too-big house working up the courage to be vulnerable. I'm scared, she finally said, of needing someone, of letting you matter, of building something that could fall apart and leave me alone again. I'm scared too, Ethan admitted. Sarah's death taught me that love is just another word for eventual loss. But Maya's teaching me something different, that connection is worth the risk, that isolation is its own kind of death, that sometimes you have to choose to trust even when everything in you is screaming to run away. What if I'm not brave enough? Victoria, you walked through hospital doors despite trauma that could have killed you. You survived losing your mother as a child and built an empire from nothing. You're brave enough. You just have to decide you want to be. I do want to be. I want... She broke off, then continued more quietly. I want what you and Maya have, that easy warmth, that sense of belonging to something bigger than yourself. I want to know what it feels like to come home to people who actually care whether you made it through the day. Then let's build that. Maybe not the same thing Maya and I have. We've had years and shared grief and biology on our side. But something new, something that works for who we both are now. A friendship between a burned-out mechanic and a workaholic CEO. Think it'll work? I think we won't know unless we try. And I think we're both tired enough of being alone that it's worth the risk. Victoria's laugh was soft but real. Okay, let's try. But Ethan? Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was giving up on myself. Anytime. That's what friends do. They talked for another hour, the conversation ranging from Maya's school projects to Victoria's plans for slowly returning to work to Ethan's struggles with the garage's finances. It felt normal and easy and significant all at once, like they were building something real in the space between their different worlds. When they finally said goodnight, Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about connection and risk, and the unexpected ways life could change in the span of a rainy night. He'd set out to save someone's life and ended up finding a reason to reclaim his own. In her Marina District house, Victoria did the same. Maya's dolphin drawing already hung beside the rainbow on her refrigerator, evidence that even the emptiest spaces could slowly fill with warmth if you let the right people in. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Victoria returned to work earlier than Dr. Chen recommended, but later than her own instincts demanded, a compromise that felt like progress. She started with half-days, working from home in the mornings and venturing into the Hale Innovations office only when absolutely necessary. Ethan checked in daily, sometimes with texts about nothing in particular, sometimes with photos Maya insisted he send. The girl had decided Victoria needed regular updates on important events like the class hamster's escape and Emma's birthday party. Victoria found herself looking forward to these interruptions in a way that would have baffled her a month ago. She'd built an empire on ruthless efficiency and undivided focus, but somehow Ethan's messages never felt like distractions. They felt like lifelines, small reminders that the world extended beyond quarterly reports and investor meetings. On a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after her surgery, Victoria's assistant Jennifer appeared in her office doorway with an expression that meant complications. Jennifer had worked for Victoria for 6 years and had mastered the art of delivering bad news with maximum efficiency. The Cartwright deal is falling apart, Jennifer said without preamble. They're getting cold feet about the infrastructure overhaul. Want to push the timeline back 6 months, which we both know means they're looking for a way out. Victoria felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the pressure that came with high-stakes negotiations threatening to collapse. The Cartwright Corporation contract represented 18 months of careful cultivation and would bring in enough revenue to fund Hale Innovations' expansion into the Asian markets. Losing it would be more than a financial setback. It would be a sign of weakness that competitors would exploit. "Set up a meeting," Victoria said, her mind already running through contingencies. "Today, if possible. I'll handle this personally." "Victoria, you're supposed to be taking it easy." "I'm fine. Set up the meeting." Jennifer nodded and disappeared, and Victoria immediately reached for her phone to call her lead consultant on the Cartwright account. Halfway through dialing, she stopped. Her incision throbbed, a reminder that she wasn't actually fine, that pushing too hard too soon was exactly the kind of behavior that had led to ignoring appendicitis symptoms until she'd nearly died in a parking lot. She put the phone down and sat there, breathing through the urge to immediately fix everything. This was the pattern. Crisis emerged. Victoria solved it personally. Victory reinforced the belief that she alone could hold everything together. It had worked for 10 years. It had also left her isolated, exhausted, and collapsing beside expensive cars in the rain. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Maya wants to know if you've ever seen an elephant seal. There's apparently a big debate at school about whether they're actually related to elephants. I tried to explain evolution, but now she wants a second opinion from someone smart like Victoria." Despite everything, Victoria smiled. She typed back, "Not related to elephants. They're pinnipeds, marine mammals. The name comes from the male's large proboscis that looks like an elephant's trunk. Tell Maya evolution is weird and wonderful." The response came immediately. "She says you're officially the smartest person she knows, and I'm demoted to second place. My ego may never recover. I'm sure you'll survive. How's the garage?" "Busy. Mrs. Patterson's Volvo is making concerning noises again. I'm starting to think that car is held together by stubbornness and prayer." "Sounds familiar." "Are you talking about yourself or me?" Victoria laughed out loud, startling herself with the sound. "Both of us, probably." "Fair. Hey, I've got to go. Customer just arrived. But call me later if you want. I'll be home after 8. She set the phone down, feeling lighter than she had moments ago. The Cartwright crisis still present, but somehow less overwhelming. It occurred to her that this was new, this ability to step back from work panic, to find perspective in the middle of chaos, to remember that her entire identity didn't rest on a single contract. Jennifer returned with news that the Cartwright meeting was set for 4 p.m. Victoria spent the next 2 hours preparing, but she also did something unprecedented. She delegated. She brought in Marcus Chen, her second-in-command, and briefed him thoroughly on the situation. Not because she didn't trust herself to handle it, but because she was beginning to understand that strength sometimes looked like sharing the load. The meeting went better than expected. Victoria let Marcus take the lead on technical details, while she focused on the relationship aspects, the personal connection that had always been her secret weapon. By 6 p.m., they'd salvaged the deal with minor timeline adjustments and actually strengthened their position. Walking out of the conference room, Marcus looked at her with poorly concealed surprise. "That was different," he said carefully. "Good different. You usually run these meetings like a one-woman show." "Maybe it's time I trusted the team I built," Victoria replied, and meant it. She made it home by 7:30, exhausted but satisfied in a way that felt different from her usual post-work depletion. This felt earned rather than drained, accomplished rather than survived. She changed into comfortable clothes, ordered takeout from the Thai place down the street, and settled onto her couch with her phone. Ethan answered on the second ring. "Hey, how'd your day go?" "I delegated," Victoria said, and heard the wonder in her own voice. "There was a crisis, a big one, and I actually let someone else help handle it instead of trying to control every detail myself." "That's huge. How does it feel?" "Terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Like I just stepped off a cliff and discovered I could fly." She paused. "Is that insane?" "Not even a little bit. That's what learning to trust feels like. It's uncomfortable until it isn't." She could hear sounds in the background, water running, dishes clattering. "Sorry, I'm doing the dinner cleanup. Maya's supposed to be helping, but she's currently conducting a very important experiment with dish soap bubbles." "Sounds serious." "Extremely. We may never recover our security deposit." His voice grew distant as he called out, "Maya, the bubbles stay in the sink, please." Then back to normal volume.
So delegation, that's real progress, Victoria. I had a good teacher.
Someone who showed me that asking for help doesn't make you weak. I didn't do anything. You did everything. You're still doing everything. Every time you check in, every time you send me ridiculous photos from Maya, every time you just show up and remind me that isolation isn't the same as strength, you're teaching me how to be human again. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I think maybe we're teaching each other. You've reminded me that it's possible to connect with someone new, that Sarah's death doesn't have to be the end of my ability to care about people. That's not nothing, Victoria. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two traumatized people stumbling towards something that looks like healing. Could be worse. At least we're stumbling together. They talked until Maya demanded Ethan's attention for bedtime stories, and Victoria hung up feeling less alone in her too big house than she had in years. The feeling persisted over the following weeks as their friendship deepened and expanded, taking on texture and depth that surprised them both. Ethan started stopping by Victoria's house after dropping Maya at school, usually with coffee and whatever baked goods they'd attempted the night before. They'd sit in her kitchen talking about everything and nothing: his struggles with the garage's finances, her insights into business management, their shared experiences with loss and single parenthood, and the daily work of choosing forward motion over paralysis. Victoria found herself offering advice about Kohl's auto repair without being asked, her business mind automatically identifying inefficiencies and opportunities. Ethan listened with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment, clearly uncomfortable accepting help, but too practical to refuse good counsel. Your pricing is too low, Victoria said one morning, reviewing the spreadsheet Ethan had reluctantly shared. You're undervaluing your expertise, especially given your specialized training, a combat medic who can also rebuild transmissions. That's a unique skill set worth premium rates. My customers can't afford premium rates. Mrs. Patterson lives on Social Security. So you charge Mrs. Patterson what she can afford and charge the Mercedes owners what they can afford, which is considerably more. It's called tiered pricing, and every successful service business uses it. Victoria tapped the screen. You're leaving money on the table because you're uncomfortable charging what you're worth. That feels like taking advantage of people. It's not taking advantage, it's running a sustainable business. You can't help anyone if the garage goes under because you're too proud to charge fair rates. She softened her tone. Ethan, you're an incredible mechanic with skills most people don't have. You deserve to be compensated for that. It doesn't make you greedy or mercenary. It makes you professional. He'd implemented her suggestions incrementally, raising rates for luxury vehicles while keeping them low for customers like Mrs. Patterson. Within 2 weeks, the garage's profit margin had improved noticeably. Ethan had shown up at Victoria's door with flowers and an admission that she'd been right. He'd been stubborn, and he was grateful beyond words. I still feel guilty charging the Tesla owner 3 times what I charge Mrs. Patterson for essentially the same work, he'd said. The Tesla owner can afford it and won't even notice. Mrs. Patterson will notice if she has to choose between car repairs and groceries. You're not being unfair, you're being equitable. There's a difference. Their friendship developed an easy give and take that felt natural despite their vastly different circumstances. Victoria helped Ethan with business strategy. Ethan helped Victoria remember to eat regular meals and occasionally leave her house for reasons other than work. Maya provided running commentary on both of them, her 8-year-old observations frequently more insightful than either adult wanted to admit. One Saturday afternoon, Maya convinced them both to go to the park. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she'd been to a playground, possibly not since she was a child herself. But Maya's enthusiasm was impossible to resist. They spent hours there, Maya demonstrating her skills on the monkey bars while Ethan and Victoria sat on a bench watching. She's fearless, Victoria observed as Maya attempted a particularly ambitious maneuver. Where does that come from? Sarah. She was the brave one in our relationship, always pushing me to try new things, take risks, live bigger. Ethan's expression turned distant. Maya has her mother's courage, but not her trauma. She doesn't know yet that the world can break you. I'm trying to let her keep that innocence as long as possible. You're protecting her from what hurt you. Is that wrong? I don't think so. But eventually she'll face her own pain, her own losses. The best thing you can do is teach her how to survive them. Victoria watched Maya, who was now attempting to teach another child her monkey bar technique. You're doing that already. Teaching her that people show up for each other, that asking for help is okay, that community matters. I'm trying. Some days it feels like enough. Other days, he broke off as Maya called for them to watch her latest trick. They both turned their attention to her, applauding when she successfully completed a flip off the bars that made Victoria's heart leap into her throat. Later, after Maya had exhausted herself and they'd stopped for ice cream, Victoria found herself thinking about family. Not the broken version she'd grown up with, absent father, dead mother, a childhood spent in emotional isolation, but the kind Maya and Ethan had built from grief and determination. It looked different from the conventional nuclear family, but it worked. It was filled with love and laughter and the kind of messy authenticity that Victoria had spent a lifetime avoiding. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria said as they drove back toward her house, Maya drowsing in the back seat. "Of course." "Do you ever think about dating, about finding someone to share your life with?" Ethan's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Sometimes, but it feels complicated. Maya has to come first, and most people don't understand that. And there's Sarah's ghost, not literally, but the memory of her, the life we had planned. It feels disloyal somehow to move forward. Sarah would want you to be happy." "I know. Intellectually, I know that. She told me explicitly, actually, during one of her clearer moments near the end. Made me promise I wouldn't spend the rest of my life alone, that I'd find someone else to love." His voice roughened. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Victoria understood that intimately. "I've never really dated. A few relationships in my 20s that didn't go anywhere. Nothing serious in almost a decade. I told myself it was because I was too busy building the company, but the truth is I was too scared. Too afraid of needing someone, of being vulnerable, of giving someone the power to hurt me. And now? Now I'm starting to think maybe loneliness is worse than risk. Maybe the only thing more terrifying than letting someone in is dying alone in a parking lot because you built walls so high nobody could reach you." They were both quiet after that, the weight of their respective fears and hopes filling the truck cab. Maya woke up as they pulled into Victoria's driveway, immediately asking if she could show Victoria her latest drawing. Inside Victoria's house, which had slowly accumulated more warmth over the past weeks, including several of Maya's artistic contributions and a series of plants that Ethan had helped select, Maya presented a carefully colored picture of 3 stick figures, one tall with dark hair, one medium with lighter hair, one small with yellow hair. "That's you," Maya explained, pointing to the dark-haired figure. "And that's Dad, and that's me. We're a team." Victoria felt emotion tighten her throat. "We are." "Of course we are. Teams help each other. You help Dad with business stuff, Dad helps you remember to eat real food, and I help both of you remember to have fun." Maya stated this with the absolute certainty of childhood. That's what teams do. Later, after Ethan and Maya had left, Victoria stood in her kitchen holding that drawing and crying for the first time in years. Not sad tears, but the overwhelmed kind that came from realizing you'd been given something you didn't know you needed. A team. A family of choice rather than obligation. People who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The next morning, Victoria made a decision. She called Ethan before she could talk herself out of it. "I want to do something for you," she said without preamble. "For the garage. A proper investment, not charity. I've been thinking about it for weeks and I have a proposal." "Victoria, you don't owe me anything. This isn't about owing. This is about good business and better friendship. Just hear me out." She took a breath. "Kohl's Auto Repair has potential. Real potential. You have the skills, the reputation, the customer base. What you don't have is capital for expansion, modern equipment, proper marketing. I want to invest. Be a silent partner. Bring the business into the 21st century. Help you build something sustainable." Ethan was quiet for so long Victoria worried she'd overstepped. Finally, he spoke. "Why?" "Because you saved my life, and I want to give you back yours. Because Maya deserves a father who isn't constantly stressed about money. Because you're brilliant at what you do, and you deserve to succeed." She paused. "And because I've spent 10 years building an empire alone, and I'm tired of being alone. Maybe it's time to build something with someone I trust. This feels like too much. It's exactly enough." We'll do it properly. Contracts, terms, fair equity split. You maintain creative control. I provide capital and business expertise. We turn your struggling garage into something that not only survives but thrives. Victoria softened her voice. Let me do this, Ethan. Let me help the way you helped me. I need to think about it. Talk to Maya, figure out what it would mean for us. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless. They hung up, and Victoria felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. She'd just offered to significantly invest in a business she'd never formally evaluated, based entirely on faith in a man she'd known for barely a month. Every business instinct she'd honed over a decade screamed that this was reckless, emotional, unprofessional. But a newer, quieter voice suggested that maybe the best investments weren't always the most logical ones. Maybe sometimes you bet on people rather than spreadsheets, on relationships rather than returns, on building something meaningful rather than just profitable. Ethan called back 3 days later. Maya and I talked. We have questions, concerns, probably unreasonable requests about maintaining the garage's soul while expanding its capabilities. I'd expect nothing less. And we want you to come to dinner, here, at our apartment. Let Maya interrogate you about your intentions toward our family business. He paused. That came out weirder than intended. Victoria laughed. I accept the invitation and the interrogation. When? Tomorrow night? Fair warning. Our apartment is about the size of your kitchen, and Maya's idea of setting the table involves approximately 75 stuffed animals as additional guests. Sounds perfect. The next evening, Victoria drove to Ethan's neighborhood feeling more nervous than she had before major investor presentations. This mattered in a way that quarterly reports never had. She was being invited into their space, their life, the carefully constructed world where Ethan and Maya had built something beautiful from broken pieces. The building was exactly what she expected, older but well-maintained, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other and kids played in the courtyard. Ethan and Maya's apartment was on the 3rd floor, and Victoria could hear laughter before she even knocked. Maya answered the door wearing an apron that declared official taste tester and covered in what appeared to be marinara sauce. You're here! We're making spaghetti and meatballs because Dad said you probably eat fancy food all the time and should try normal people food. I love spaghetti and meatballs, Victoria said honestly, stepping inside. The apartment was small but filled with life in a way her house had never been. Photos covered the walls. Maya at various ages, Ethan in his army uniform, a beautiful blonde woman Victoria recognized as Sarah holding infant Maya. The furniture was worn but comfortable, the kind that invited you to actually sit rather than just look. Books and toys competed for space on every surface, and the whole place smelled like garlic and tomato sauce and home. Welcome to chaos, Ethan said, emerging from the kitchen wiping his hands on a towel. Fair warning, dinner might be a disaster. Maya insisted on helping with the meatballs, and her idea of seasoning is more is always better. I'm sure it'll be delicious. Dinner was indeed chaotic, but wonderful. The spaghetti was slightly overcooked, the meatballs were aggressively seasoned, and Maya's table settings meant they were surrounded by an audience of stuffed animals in various states of dishevelment. But the conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Maya's running commentary on everything from school drama to her theories about why penguins can't fly. After dinner, while Maya was distracted by a cartoon, Ethan and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the beginnings of a business plan. Victoria had brought preliminary documents, investment proposals, equity structures, expansion timelines. Ethan had brought questions and concerns and a vulnerability that made Victoria respect him even more. I need to maintain control, Ethan said firmly. Not because I don't trust you, but because this garage is all I have left of the person I was before Sarah died. It's proof that I can build something, that I'm not just surviving, but creating. I can't lose that. You won't. This is your business, your vision. I'm just providing resources and expertise. Think of me as a consultant with a financial stake. Victoria slid over a document. I drafted terms that give you full operational control. I advise, I invest, I help with strategy. But final decisions are yours. Ethan reviewed the paperwork with careful attention, occasionally asking questions that proved he understood business better than he gave himself credit for. Finally, he looked up. Why are you really doing this, Victoria? And don't give me the line about good business sense. There are safer investments. Because you showed me that showing up matters. Because Maya taught me that families can be built, not just born into. Because for the first time in my adult life, I want to build something with someone instead of building alone. She met his eyes. And because I believe in you, Ethan. I believe you can create something extraordinary if you have the resources to match your talent. This changes things between us. Mixing friendship and business, that's complicated. Everything worthwhile is complicated. The question is whether it's worth the risk. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Sarah would have liked you. She would have appreciated how you push me to think bigger, to take chances, to believe I'm capable of more than just getting by. I wish I could have met her. She would have been thrilled to see Maya with someone like you in her life. Sarah always said Maya needed strong women role models, people who showed her that strength came in different forms. He smiled slightly. She'd probably be laughing at me right now. The guy who spent 3 years avoiding all meaningful human connection is about to enter a business partnership based primarily on trust and friendship. Is that a yes? It's a yes, with conditions, clauses, and probably more anxiety than any business deal should reasonably involve. He extended his hand across the table. Partners? Victoria shook his hand, feeling the calluses from years of mechanical work, the strength that came from surviving impossible things. Partners. Maya appeared then, demanding they both come see her latest Lego creation. They spent the rest of the evening on the living room floor helping construct an elaborate space station while Maya narrated an increasingly complex story involving alien invasions and robot cats. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she'd sat on a floor, let alone played with Legos, but something about the simplicity of it was healing. When she finally left around 9, Maya hugged her goodbye with unselfconscious affection. You're officially part of our team now. That means you have to come to my piano recital next month and also help Dad remember my birthday is in 6 weeks and I want a telescope. Duly noted, Victoria said, hugging her back. Ethan walked her to her car, the evening air cool and clear. Thank you, he said quietly, for believing in me, in us, in the possibility that good things can still happen. Thank you for teaching me what that looks like. Driving home, Victoria felt something fundamental shift inside her. For 10 years, she'd measured success in revenue and market share, and how much she'd accumulated and how high she'd climbed. But tonight, sitting on a worn carpet building Lego spaceships with people who chose to include her in their lives, she'd felt richer than any balance sheet could measure. Her house no longer felt quite so empty when she arrived. Maya's drawings on the refrigerator, plants in various stages of thriving, evidence that her life was expanding beyond the narrow confines she'd built. She made tea and settled onto her couch with the partnership documents, reviewing terms that represented not just a business investment, but a leap of faith. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Maya wants you to know the stuffed elephant you sat next to at dinner really liked you and hopes you'll visit again soon. Victoria smiled and typed back, Tell the elephant the feeling is mutual, and Ethan, thank you for letting me in. Thank you for showing up, repeatedly, even when I made it difficult. Especially then. She fell asleep on the couch that night. The partnership documents spread around her and dreamed of futures that looked nothing like the past. Garages that became sanctuaries, friendships that became families, and second chances that arrived disguised as emergencies in rainy parking lots. The partnership papers were signed on a Wednesday morning in Victoria's downtown office, with lawyers present and everything properly documented despite the unconventional circumstances of how they'd arrived at this moment. Ethan had worn the same button-down shirt Maya approved of, looking uncomfortable in the sleek conference room surrounded by leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victoria watched him sign his name with careful precision. This man who'd saved her life now trusting her with his livelihood, and felt the weight of that responsibility settle around her shoulders like a promise. Well, Ethan said as the lawyers gathered their documents, that's official. Cole's Auto Repair now has a partner who could buy and sell it 10 times over. Cole's Auto Repair now has a partner who believes it can be something extraordinary, Victoria corrected. She turned to her assistant Jennifer, who'd been quietly observing from the corner. Clear my calendar for tomorrow. I want to see the garage, understand the operation, figure out what we're working with." Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. In 6 years of working together, Victoria had never cleared her calendar for anything that wasn't a multi-million-dollar negotiation. The fact that she was doing it now for a small auto repair shop spoke volumes about how much had changed. The next morning, Victoria arrived at Cole's Auto Repair at 7 a.m., wearing jeans and a blouse that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but was at least practical. The garage sat on a corner lot that had seen better decades, the building's exterior showing its age despite obvious efforts at maintenance. The sign still flickered erratically, and the paint was peeling, but there was something solid about it, something honest that appealed to Victoria in ways her gleaming corporate offices never had. Ethan met her at the door, already in his work clothes, grease stains on his hands despite the early hour. "Welcome to my kingdom. Try not to be too horrified." "I've seen worse," Victoria lied kindly, then followed him inside. The garage's interior told a story of a man doing his absolute best with limited resources. The equipment was old but meticulously maintained. The floor was spotless despite decades of use. Tools hung in organized rows, each in its designated place. 2 cars occupied the bays, Mrs. Patterson's immortal Volvo and a newer sedan Victoria didn't recognize. "Give me the full tour," Victoria said. "Don't sugarcoat anything. I need to understand what we're working with." Ethan walked her through every aspect of the operation, pointing out systems that worked and ones that needed upgrading, explaining his workflow and customer base with the kind of detailed knowledge that came from living and breathing the business. Victoria listened, asked questions, and made mental notes about everything from the ancient diagnostic computer to the lack of a proper waiting area to the cramped office where Ethan handled all his administrative work. "The bones are good," she said finally, standing in the middle of the main bay. "Really good. You've built something sustainable here, Ethan. We just need to give it room to grow." Over the next month, Victoria threw herself into the garage renovation with the same intensity she'd once reserved for corporate acquisitions. She hired contractors to update the exterior, brought in equipment specialists to modernize the bays, and worked with Ethan to design a customer waiting area that actually felt welcoming. Every decision was collaborative, Victoria offering options and expertise, while Ethan made the final calls about what fit his vision. "This is weird for you, isn't it?" Ethan observed one afternoon as they reviewed paint samples, "not being the one making all the decisions." "Weirdly liberating, actually," Victoria admitted. "Turns out not everything has to rest on my shoulders. Who knew?" Maya had appointed herself unofficial project supervisor, stopping by after school to offer opinions on color schemes and lobby furniture. Her presence transformed the renovation from a business project into something that felt like family, her enthusiasm infectious as she dragged Victoria around, pointing out details only an 8-year-old would notice. "The waiting room needs books," Maya declared. "And maybe some toys for kids who have to wait while their parents' cars get fixed. And definitely better magazines than the ones Dad has now because they're all about cars, and that's boring." "All excellent points," Victoria said seriously, making notes on her tablet. "What else?" "A coffee maker. A good one, not the cheap kind. Dad says people appreciate good coffee." Maya paused thoughtfully. "And maybe some of those cookies we made? Not all the time, but sometimes? So people know this is a nice place?" Victoria found herself genuinely considering the cookie suggestion, which would have been unthinkable 2 months ago. But Maya was right. The small touches mattered, the gestures that transformed a business transaction into human connection. She made a note to look into it. The grand reopening happened on a Saturday in late spring, 6 weeks after Victoria had first proposed the partnership. They'd kept the name Cole's Auto Repair, but added a subtitle that Maya had suggested, "Where Every Car Matters." The exterior gleamed with fresh paint, the sign no longer flickered, and the interior had been transformed into something that balanced professionalism with warmth. Ethan had insisted on a modest celebration, nothing fancy, just an open house for existing customers and neighbors. But Victoria had quietly arranged for local press coverage, knowing that good publicity would help establish the garage's new reputation. She'd also reached out to several luxury car owners in her network, mentioning that she'd found an exceptional mechanic who combined military precision with genuine care. The turnout exceeded everyone's expectations. Mrs. Patterson arrived early, bringing homemade cookies and proclaiming loudly that she'd known all along Ethan was destined for great things. Former customers who drifted away returned to see the changes. New potential clients wandered in, drawn by the professional appearance and growing reputation. Maya had dressed for the occasion in what she called her business casual outfit, a sundress decorated with cartoon cats paired with sneakers that lit up when she walked. She'd appointed herself official greeter, shaking hands with visitors and explaining the renovation process with the kind of detail that suggested she'd been paying very close attention. "My dad is the best mechanic ever," she told anyone who would listen. "And Victoria helped make the garage better so more people can find out. They're partners, which means they're a team, which means they help each other. That's how it's supposed to work." Victoria watched this performance from across the room, standing beside Ethan while he fielded questions from curious customers. "She's going to be running her own company by the time she's 20, Victoria observed. "Terrifying thought," Ethan agreed, but his voice was warm with pride. "Though I suppose she's learning from the best. Between you teaching her about business and me teaching her about engines, she'll be unstoppable. Between us teaching her about resilience and showing up for people, she'll be extraordinary," Victoria corrected. The day was declared a success by every measure. Ethan booked 3 new customers on the spot, including the owner of a vintage Porsche who'd been looking for someone who understood classic cars. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears and declared this the best day she'd had since her husband passed. Maya ate too much cake and charmed everyone she encountered. As the sun set and the last visitors departed, the 3 of them sat in the renovated waiting area surrounded by the debris of celebration. Empty cups, crumpled napkins, a few lingering balloons. Maya had crashed on the new couch, exhausted from her duties as official greeter, while Ethan and Victoria cleaned up in comfortable silence. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly, not for the first time. "For all of this. For believing this place could be something more." "Thank you for letting me help build it," Victoria replied. "I've spent 10 years building things alone. This feels different, better." "Well, Maya told me yesterday that you're her favorite person besides me and Mrs. Chen. Apparently you rank higher than her teacher and Emma combined, which is serious business in 8-year-old metrics." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "She told me I'm part of the family now, that families are people who choose each other and show up and help when things are hard." "She's not wrong." Ethan set down the garbage bag he'd been filling and turned to face her fully. "You are family, Victoria. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but in the ways that matter. You show up, you help, you care about what happens to us. You did the same for me. You showed up when I was dying in a parking lot, and you've kept showing up every day since." They stood there in the settling dusk, the garage's new lights casting everything in warm tones, and Victoria felt something shift between them, something that had been building for weeks but neither had acknowledged. The air felt charged with possibility, with the recognition that maybe their connection went deeper than friendship, deeper than partnership, into territory that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Victoria," Ethan started, then stopped as Maya stirred on the couch. "Is it bedtime?" Maya mumbled, her eyes barely open. "I'm tired from all the professional greeting." The moment passed, but it didn't disappear. It lingered in glances and almost touches, in the way Ethan's hand would brush Victoria's shoulder when they reviewed documents, in the way Victoria found excuses to stop by the garage, even when there was no business reason to do so. 2 weeks after the grand reopening, Maya invited Victoria to her piano recital with the kind of earnest hopefulness that made refusal impossible. Victoria cleared her evening calendar, something she never did, and found herself in an elementary school auditorium surrounded by proud parents and squirming siblings. Maya performed a simplified version of a classical piece, her concentration absolute, her small hands navigating the keys with determination, if not always precision. When she finished, she beamed at the audience, then specifically at the section where Victoria and Ethan sat together, and Victoria felt her heart expand in a way she'd thought it couldn't anymore. After the recital, they went for ice cream, a tradition, Maya explained, that had started after her first recital when Sarah was still alive. Victoria felt honored to be included, to be woven into the rituals that held their small family together. "Mom always said celebrations required ice cream," Maya explained seriously, working on a cone that was rapidly melting faster than she could eat it. "And piano recitals are definitely celebrations, even if I messed up the middle part." You were wonderful, Victoria assured her. I was completely mesmerized. You're just saying that because you're nice. I'm not actually known for being nice, Victoria said honestly. I'm known for being brutally honest and slightly terrifying. If I say you were wonderful, I mean it. Maya considered this, then nodded with satisfaction. Okay then, I was wonderful. Later, after they dropped Maya at home with Mrs. Chen, Ethan suggested a walk. They ended up at the waterfront, watching the city lights reflect off the dark water, standing close enough that Victoria could feel the warmth of his presence in the cool evening air. I need to tell you something, Ethan said, his voice careful. And I need you to know I don't have expectations. I'm not trying to complicate our partnership or our friendship, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. Victoria's heart hammered. Feel what? This, you, us. He turned to face her. Somewhere between saving your life and building a business together and watching you love my daughter, I fell for you. Not the CEO version or the controlled public version, but the real you. The one who cried over Maya's drawings and admitted to being scared and learned to delegate because it was braver than doing everything alone. Ethan, let me finish. I know it's complicated. I know we have a business partnership to consider. I know I come with a lot of baggage. A daughter, a dead wife's memory, more trauma than any relationship should reasonably have to carry. But I also know that for the first time since Sarah died, I want to try. I want to see if maybe this thing between us could be something more than friendship. Victoria felt like she was standing on the edge of the same cliff she'd faced in the hospital parking lot, fear and possibility warring for dominance. Every instinct she'd honed over a decade screamed at her to protect herself, to maintain distance, to avoid the risk of needing someone who could leave. But she'd learned something in the months since that rainy night. Fear was a liar. Safety wasn't the same as isolation. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose connection despite the terror. I'm scared, she said honestly. I don't know how to do this. Relationships, vulnerability, trusting someone with my heart. I've spent so long protecting myself that I don't know how to stop. I'm scared too. Terrified, actually, but I'm also tired of letting fear make my decisions. Ethan took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle. We don't have to figure it all out tonight. We can take it slow, see what develops, give ourselves permission to be uncertain and messy and human. What about Maya? If this doesn't work out, Maya already loves you. That won't change regardless of what happens between us. She'll still be part of your life because you're part of ours now, in whatever form that takes. He paused. But I think it will work out. I think we've both been moving toward this since the moment I refused to let you die in that parking lot. Victoria thought about the past months, about how thoroughly these two people had infiltrated her carefully controlled life. Maya's drawings on her refrigerator, Ethan's number at the top of her favorites, the way her house had slowly transformed from a showplace into something approaching a home. The realization that she looked forward to their time together more than any business success. Okay, she said softly. Let's try. Slowly, carefully, with full acknowledgement that we're both disasters who have no idea what we're doing. Best offer I've had in years, Ethan said, and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, and absolutely terrifying in the best possible way. Victoria felt tears slide down her cheeks, happy tears, overwhelmed tears, tears that came from finally letting someone past walls she'd spent a lifetime constructing. When they pulled apart, Ethan brushed the tears away with his thumb. You okay? More than okay. Terrified and happy and so far outside my comfort zone, I can't even see it from here, but okay. She laughed shakily. Maya's going to be insufferable about this, isn't she? Absolutely. She's been not so subtly suggesting we should date like in movies for weeks now. I suspect she's been planning this longer than either of us. They walked back to the car, hand in hand, and Victoria marveled at how such a simple gesture could feel so significant. She'd negotiated million-dollar deals with less nervousness than she felt holding Ethan's hand, but also with considerably less joy. The next morning, Maya took one look at them arriving together to pick her up for their usual Saturday breakfast and announced, "Finally, I was starting to think I'd have to do everything myself." "Oh, really?" Ethan said, trying to sound stern and failing completely. And what exactly have you been planning? Just encouraging things along, making sure you spent time together, leaving you alone when you needed to talk. I'm very subtle. Maya said this with the utter confidence of someone who had never been subtle a day in her life. Victoria laughed. How long have you been scheming? Since the cookies, when Dad came home after the first time we visited you, and he had that look. What look? Ethan asked. The happy, confused look, like he didn't know he could feel that way anymore, but also didn't know what to do about it. Maya shrugged. Mom used to talk about you having that look when you first met her. I recognized it from pictures. The reference to Sarah could have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. It felt right, like Sarah's memory was blessing this new beginning rather than haunting it. Over the following months, they navigated their new relationship with the same careful attention they'd brought to the garage renovation. Some days were easy, filled with laughter and connection and the simple pleasure of being together. Other days were hard, when grief or fear or old patterns threatened to pull them back into isolation. Victoria learned to let Ethan see her at her worst, when work stress overwhelmed her, when old traumas surfaced, when her instinct was to run rather than stay. Ethan learned to trust that Victoria wouldn't disappear, that her commitment was real even when things got difficult, that loving someone new didn't diminish what he'd had with Sarah. Maya navigated the changes with remarkable grace, though she established ground rules early on. If you're going to be together, she'd announced seriously, you have to promise not to be gross about it in front of me. Also, Victoria can't try to be my mom because I have a mom even though she's dead, but she can be like a bonus grown-up who's part of the family. Deal, they'd both agreed, touched by her wisdom. The garage thrived beyond anyone's expectations. Word spread about the transformed shop where a combat medic turned mechanic combined technical excellence with genuine care for customers. Victoria's business expertise helped streamline operations while Ethan's insistence on maintaining the personal touch kept it from becoming just another corporate venture. They found a balance that honored both their strengths. 6 months after the reopening, Ethan proposed a new name for the business, not replacing Cole's Auto Repair entirely, but adding a partner designation. Second Chance Garage was Maya's suggestion, inspired by a drawing she'd made of the garage with a rainbow arching over it, similar to the one she'd first drawn for Victoria in the hospital. Because everyone deserves a second chance, Maya had explained. Victoria got a second chance when Dad saved her life. Dad got a second chance when Victoria helped save the garage. And all the cars get second chances when they come here broken and leave fixed. It's perfect. Victoria had cried when she saw the new sign go up, Cole's Auto Repair and Second Chance Garage, where every car matters. It represented everything they'd built together, second chances at life, at love, at believing good things could still happen after loss and trauma and years of protecting yourself from connection. 1 year after the rainy night that had changed everything, Victoria stood in front of County General Hospital with Ethan and Maya, looking up at the building that had once represented her deepest fear. She'd called in favors, leveraged connections, and donated a substantial sum to fund the renovation of the emergency wing. Today they were here for the dedication ceremony. The new wing gleamed with modern equipment and thoughtful design, every detail chosen to make the space less intimidating, more welcoming. At the entrance, a plaque read, "The Sarah Cole Memorial Emergency Wing, in honor of those we've lost and those we've saved." "You didn't have to do this," Ethan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I did. Sarah saved you, you saved me, and together we're building something that saves others." Victoria squeezed his hand. "Besides, Maya helped choose the colors. This is as much her project as mine." Maya stood between them, holding both their hands, her face serious as she looked at her mother's name permanently inscribed on the building. Mom would like this. She always said the best way to honor people who died was to help people who were living. Inside, Dr. Chen found them during the reception. "This is incredible what you've done. The new equipment, the redesigned triage system, the trauma-informed waiting areas, you've made this place better in ways that will save lives for decades." "We all played a part," Victoria said, gesturing to Ethan and Maya. "Every good thing I've done this past year traces back to that night, to being forced to face my fears and finding people who made me want to be braver." Dr. Chen smiled knowingly. "Fear is a powerful teacher when we're willing to learn from it. You learned well. That evening, the three of them sat in Victoria's backyard. She'd finally hired landscapers to create an actual outdoor space, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Maya was sprawled on a blanket with her latest book, while Ethan and Victoria occupied the new patio furniture, close enough to touch but comfortable in the silence. "I've been thinking," Ethan said eventually, "about the future, about where we go from here." Victoria's heart jumped, but she kept her voice steady. "And what did you conclude?" "That I'm tired of living in separate houses. That Maya asks every week why Victoria doesn't just move in with us since she's here almost every day anyway. That I want to wake up next to you without having to coordinate schedules or figure out logistics." "You're asking me to move in?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it. Not rushing, not demanding, just, would you think about it? About building a life together in the same space instead of commuting between two homes that are both too empty when we're apart?" Victoria thought about her Marina District house with its perfect minimalism and persistent echoes. She thought about Ethan's modest apartment with its comfortable chaos and evidence of love in every corner. She thought about what home actually meant, not square footage or property value, but the presence of people who chose you, who showed up, who made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that. Though we'll need more space than your current apartment. And less space than your current house," Ethan added with a smile. "Something in between. Something that's ours." "Ours," Victoria repeated, testing the word. A year ago she'd had everything and owned it all alone. Now she had less individual control but infinitely more richness, partnership, family, love that was messy and complicated and absolutely worth every risk. Maya looked up from her book. "Are you talking about moving in together? Because I have opinions about houses. They need good light for reading, and a big kitchen for making cookies, and a yard where we can get a dog." "A dog?" Ethan said weakly. "Obviously a dog. Every family needs a dog. It's basically a rule." Maya returned to her book as if this settled the matter completely. Victoria and Ethan exchanged glances, and Victoria saw her own emotion reflected in his eyes, joy and terror, and overwhelming gratitude that life could surprise you like this, could take your worst night and transform it into the beginning of your best life. 3 months later, they moved into a house that split the difference between Victoria's Marina District mansion and Ethan's cramped apartment. It had space for Maya's telescope and Victoria's home office and a garage where Ethan could work on personal projects. It had a kitchen big enough for family baking sessions and a yard where they eventually adopted a rescue dog that Maya named Chance. The house filled quickly with the accumulated evidence of blended lives. Maya's drawings everywhere, Ethan's tools organized in the garage, Victoria's business books sharing shelf space with children's literature and automotive manuals. Photos went up on the walls, a mix of old and new, honoring Sarah's memory while celebrating their present. On a quiet Sunday morning, 6 months after moving in, Victoria woke to find Ethan already up, standing at the bedroom window looking out at their yard where Maya was playing with Chance. She joined him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how far we've come. About how a year and a half ago I was convinced my life had peaked at 25. That everything after Sarah was just going through motions until Maya was grown." His voice was soft, reflective. "And about how wrong I was. How much I would have missed if you hadn't collapsed in that parking lot. If I hadn't stopped. If we hadn't both chosen to be brave when everything in us wanted to run." I think about that night a lot too, about how close I came to dying alone, surrounded by success but completely isolated. About how you refusing to let me give in to fear quite literally saved my life in every way that matters. They stood there watching Maya, who'd convinced Chance to participate in some elaborate game that involved a lot of running and even more laughter. The simple domesticity of the moment felt more valuable than any corporate acquisition, more meaningful than any revenue report. "Thank you," Ethan said, turning to face Victoria, "for taking a chance on a struggling mechanic and his daughter, for showing up even when it was hard, for choosing us. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, when I was at my worst and deciding I was worth saving anyway." Victoria kissed him gently. "For teaching me that strength isn't the same as isolation, that vulnerability is actually courage, that families can be built from choice rather than obligation. Maya's voice carried through the open window. "Dad! Victoria! Chance learned a new trick. Come see!" They went, of course, because that's what family did. They showed up for the small moments, the ordinary mornings, the simple joys that accumulated into something extraordinary. They chose connection over safety, presence over protection, love despite its inherent risks. The garage continued to thrive, becoming known throughout the city as the place where skill met heart, where customers became friends, where second chances were offered freely. Victoria's company expanded into new markets, but she learned to delegate, to trust her team, to remember that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Maya grew up surrounded by love from multiple directions. A father who showed her that grief didn't have to mean the end of joy, a bonus parent who demonstrated that strength came in many forms, and the memory of a mother whose courage lived on in the family they'd built from broken pieces. On the second anniversary of the night Victoria had nearly died in a parking lot, they returned to Marcello's restaurant, not because Victoria wanted to relive the trauma, but because she wanted to reclaim it, to prove that the worst night of her life had actually been the beginning of her best one. They sat in the private dining room where Victoria had once conducted business with calculated precision, but this time the meal was personal. Maya dressed up for the occasion, declaring it important to look fancy professional for special celebrations. Ethan wore the shirt Maya approved of, now joined by several others Victoria had helped him select. Victoria herself wore something elegant but comfortable, no longer needing armor because she was surrounded by people who loved her without pretense. 2 years ago tonight, Victoria said, raising her water glass in a toast, I learned that the scariest moments can also be the most transformative ones. That sometimes we have to lose everything, or almost lose everything, to discover what actually matters. To second chances, Ethan added, raising his own glass. To families you choose, Maya contributed, her juice glass held high. And to Chance the dog, who's probably destroying something at home right now. They laughed and clinked glasses, and Victoria felt tears slip down her cheeks. But these weren't tears of fear or loss, or the desperate isolation that had defined her for so long. These were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming joy, of recognition that life could surprise you even when you thought you had everything figured out. After dinner, they walked to the spot in the parking lot where everything had changed. The rain had returned, a gentle spring shower rather than the punishing storm of 2 years ago, but the symmetry wasn't lost on any of them. Right here, Victoria said, pointing to the space beside what had been her Mercedes but was now just another parking spot. This is where I collapsed, where I was convinced I was dying, where I thought my story was ending. And this is where I found you, Ethan said, standing beside her, where I decided that fear didn't get to win anymore, where both our stories actually began. Maya stood between them, one hand in each of theirs. Stories are funny like that. They don't always start where you think they will. Sometimes the scary parts are actually the important parts because they lead to the good stuff. Victoria looked at this child who'd taught her more about courage and connection than a decade of corporate success ever had, and at the man who'd refused to let her die in multiple senses of the word, and at the life they'd built together from the wreckage of loss and trauma and carefully constructed walls. Fear had brought them together, Victoria's fear of hospitals, Ethan's fear of failing another person, both their fears of connection after devastating loss. But courage had kept them together, the courage to show up, to try, to risk everything for the possibility of something better. The rain fell gently around them as they stood in that parking lot, no longer a place of near death, but a monument to transformation. To the night, fear collided with courage and love emerged from the wreckage. To the recognition that sometimes saving someone else's life was how you learned to save your own. Ready to go home? Ethan asked. Victoria smiled, squeezing both their hands. Ready. They walked back to the car together, a family built from choice and crisis and the extraordinary courage of ordinary moments. Behind them, the parking lot held only rain and pavement, and the ghost of a woman who'd nearly died there but had instead learned to live. Sometimes the bravest act wasn't being fearless. Sometimes it was refusing to let fear decide the ending. And sometimes, if you were incredibly lucky, you found people who helped you write a better story than you ever could have imagined alone. The rain washed everything clean as they drove home to a house filled with laughter and love, to a garage where second chances were offered daily, to a life built on the simple truth that showing up for each other was the most revolutionary act of all. In the end, that rainy night in the parking lot hadn't been about death at all. It had been about choosing life, messy, complicated, beautiful life, in all its terrifying and magnificent glory.